Come on up.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Erica Legursky, Senior Policy Advisor for Governor Gordon. Just would like to introduce you guys to Jeff Kleins. He's going to be our new ETS Director. He's been in the job 2 weeks, 3 weeks now. So just wanted to maybe have him tell you a little bit about himself, and we're super excited that he's here.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Jeff Kleins, Director of Enterprise Technology Services, end of 3rd week. So just learning all stuff. Great here to be here, meet people, introduce myself. I've got about 25 years in technology. Just came from CIO for the state of South Dakota for the last 4.5 years. Got to come closer to home. Grew up in Denver, but my family's from Star Valley. So my grandparents, my mom was born there, my dad was raised there, and that's really home for me. So love the beauty of the star of all valleys. Exactly. Thank you.
But I was trying to remember, is Fairview a lower or upper?
Fairview, the lower valley.
Those of us who are not as pure as the Star Valley folks, we always get that confused, and we want to make sure that we say it correctly. We're very glad to have you back home.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I can give you some free advice: under promise and over deliver. You're taking on a department that's still relatively new and immature in many ways. There'll be a lot of challenges there, and just let us know how we can help.
Okay.
None, Mr. Chair. I'm ready to go to work. We've got quite a bit on the plate in front of us, and I'm looking forward to knocking them out just like grounders in a baseball game.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of the mic, so. All right, Dale, go ahead. Roll call. We need roll call?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, let's go ahead and do roll call.
Here.
For the Joint Appropriations Committee on September 27th, 2024, Representative Henderson.
Here.
Representative Larson. Representative Sherwood. Here. Representative Stitt.
Excused.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Representative Swanitzer.
Here. Here.
Pardon me, Senator Anderson.
Here.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Nethercott.
Excused.
Senator Salazar.
Excused.
Co-Chairman Kinski.
Here.
Chairman Nicholas.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, Dale, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great to be here again. I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity again to talk about, the potential for a statewide strategic plan. I really think it would be beneficial to the state and to the overall building program. I think it would lay out for policymakers such as yourself the ability to look well into the future and kind of see what the condition of our buildings are, where we'd be headed with funding requests in the future. And I think consolidation of services as far as trying to scope projects together and give us economy of scale on a lot of different projects. One of the things that we are planning as an agency department to roll out in the near future is a facility condition assessment on the state buildings. The last one was done in about 2015. So it's about 10 years old on that. So we're going to be rolling that out in the near future and hope to have that completed by late next fall.
Director McComey, how often should those assessments take place? If that's 10 years, is that often enough or?
Mr. Chairman, I think probably on about a 5-year rotation. So I think we are kind of behind the ball on that. And then as new buildings come online, I think we need to run through and do an assessment to kind of get a ground level on those as part of that assessment, you get the building floor plans and everything and the square footage, and we put that all into our database that we have in our department. So for example, on the schools, we have all their floor plans, their square footage calculations, their FCI scores on each individual building, location data on that, whether they own the land or not, acreage, all those sort of things. And then as work is done, either major maintenance component projects under the new system that we have, we'll feed that back in, and that will adjust their facility condition index scores in real time. So that hasn't been done in the past. When those surveys were done in the past, you would get a snapshot in time, and then until the next survey was done on a building, that's what the score was. And we can now adjust that real time and make those adjustments. So it shouldn't be a big shock to anybody, like has been in the last time that we did one of these assessments. Why did I see this big change on my building? So, so that is, yes.
Dale, remind me, just reorient me a little bit to where we are, because I left off at Buffalo, and this is my recollection. I may be wrong. You don't need any legislation from us. You're a department head. You've got the authority to just go ahead and undergo this strategic planning process. You had a consultant who outlined a process. I think you've got a process outlined internally. And if anything, you just need the money, or I think you already have the money to get it started. Aren't you already underway on this strategic planning process?
Mr. Chairman, no, we're not, and don't have the funding right at this point in time for that process. Yes, I think we can move forward. The reason that, well, twofold. One is to look for funding to do it, but the other is engagement of the legislature themselves in this process. As we move forward, I think that there should be a committee put together, a task force, whatever you want to call it, where we have members of the legislature involved, as well as the executive branch and some of the agencies, because it's twofold. And so, Mr. Chairman, let me kind of recap the two primary principles that I'm looking for in this strategic plan. The first goal is to maximize the life cycle of our buildings and reduce our overall operating costs, and really give, again, policymakers an understanding of what it costs to maintain these buildings. And in doing that, I want to look at what it costs, what it takes for routine maintenance. Are we doing that properly? And then secondly, major maintenance costs, again, and those tied together because they go hand in hand. If you don't do one, it impacts the other. I think you heard Mr. Small up at the Buffalo meeting talk about reactive preventive maintenance, 3 times more expensive. That's just on the preventive maintenance plan. So I think we want to lay out how those plans are working for routine maintenance as well as major maintenance, and then a long-term funding cycle. And we can derive that from the FCA that we'll be doing, the facility condition assessment, on the life cycle of buildings as we move forward. And so, again, I think that would give policymakers well into the future. This thing should be updated every 5 years. So to come back to Representative Larson's question on how often should we do those building assessments, I think that would tie into that. And whether it's through the SBC on rules and regulations that says we need to go back every 5 years to review this plan, or whether it's in statute to do that. I think it needs to be somewhere within history that we need to do this every 5 years to keep that plan updated and going, again, to provide information to the governor's office and to this body.
Director McComey, I just want to make sure I understand currently how we kind of do that, but if I recollect accurately, we kind of base our major maintenance or state facilities off the statutory requirement that's in the schools. Schools are at 2%, I think, replacement cost per square foot, something like that. But we don't have anything that requires us to do that on the state side for state maintained buildings, and which would seem to me to fit into this. If you're going to have a master plan, you've got to have something that somehow requires that we maintain it as best we can, but do I have that accurately now? On how it is now?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And Mr. Chairman, let me point out, I'm not asking for any money increases for major maintenance, for routine maintenance. I think we need to go through this process to figure out what that is, because depending on the type of building you have, I think you heard Mr. Small talk about level of service on routine maintenance. What you do in a maintenance building is totally different than we do at the state hospital as far as routine maintenance levels. So to make a broad brush, we need to be at this funding for routine maintenance and even major maintenance. I think as we look at our overall portfolio and we look at the age of the buildings, I think there's different things you can do to a building at different times that you don't necessarily need a 2.56 has been the recommendation to go to on the school buildings. I don't think you need that on the state side for those. And even within the schools, I think depending on how we want to cycle through and maybe do remodels on the school side to stay up with the changes in how they teach students, maybe we don't do as much on major maintenance and we program that out on a 25-year cycle instead of a 50-year cycle. So we don't do as much on major maintenance. And then on those 25-year cycles, you come in and do more of a remodel. And that's based on the systems that change out in the buildings. Then you can change that to again, take into account how they are currently teaching children in those buildings. We have buildings that are older than I am that are schools right now. And when I went to school, nobody heard of a computer. Nobody heard of all this electronic stuff. It wasn't set up in the building and the walls or anything else to have that kind of stuff in the buildings. So again, I think this plan would help us lay out in a broader picture how we can take care of our buildings. And I am totally convinced in doing this, both from when I was at YDOT on the road sections, from my directorship here at school facilities and state construction department, my work in the consultant field, that we can save substantial amounts of money. I mean, substantial amounts of money for the state of Wyoming if we do this. Okay. The second part of this policy is, I've talked about it a little bit, but that's to provide you and the governor's office with a plan looking forward, with a path that will shape how we'll do future funding. And one of the things that I pointed out in the very first meeting back in May was this cycle of bust boom and funding, and how we create our own inflation. We invite out-of-staters in, and if the out-of-staters are coming in, that means they're making the costs are high enough to bring them in state that our local contractors can't take care of the work, is to provide a funding base that's more uniform. So in the good years that the state may have, instead of funding a $500 or $600 million program, maybe we figure out that 300 million would do it, take the other 200 and put it in some kind of an account so we can level out the funding stream. And I think what that will do is it will help our industry in Wyoming. They can plan ahead for work coming up. They can plan for their workforce and tie that back then into, I've had a lot of conversations with industry and with both the schools and college folks in the CTE programs, that what do we need in Wyoming from those programs? And I think this plan will help spark that interest in those schools. I recently went on a tour and went to 5 or 6 different schools in Wyoming, talked to them about their CTE programs. They have more interest in their CTE programs right now than they have rooms. Every one of those schools, and they have ability to put students in. They have waiting students to get on these programs. And that's good for Wyoming if we can put those workers to work. But the problem with the bust boom cycles, we put them to work for a short period of time, and then we have a lag in between, and they leave the state. They leave the state. And industry has testified to that. I know they're here again today, and they can tell the story. I think you've heard it already, but I think that's very important. That's the second phase of this. And again, through that study, I think we can figure out what that is. That's not to say that there won't be higher funding levels, and that's not to say there will be years when we maybe wouldn't spend whatever we say that is going to be. It's going to be based on real data. But I think if we have a funding stream that levels that out, the state will be in a much better place. And it won't be just from a government funding aspect. It'll be from an industry aspect and from an education situation. You know, people talk about timing is everything. Right now, one of the things we're doing on the school side is every 4 years, we're required to update our adequacy standards. And I think we need to take a hard look. We've had discussions with the commission and stuff right now through this process that we look at the square footage and how big those CTE rooms need to be for teaching that in the future. Again, everybody that I'm talking to right now has people waiting to come into those programs. And we see the baby boomers, retiring out in those programs across the nation. And there's a big demand for HVAC and plumbers and welders and all those kind of things. And I think, again, this plan, believe it or not, I think can tie in and help that program.
Along the line of projecting, as you know, this committee and with Craig, we project out a couple of years on what our revenue is going to be. Then we start to draft our budget. If you put this plan in place, would that allow you then to project perhaps a couple of years out and help us prepare earlier for anticipated costs for major maintenance, routine maintenance, and alike?
Mr. Chairman, it certainly would. So the FCAs that we're doing now give us a predictive model on buildings that's 20 years out. Now, albeit 20 years out is a long time, but a lot of that's based on the actual systems that are in a building. HVA, your roof typically is 20 years. That's what they're looking at. But I would say certainly we'll have a really solid idea in the next 10 years of what's coming up through these assessments. So I think that as we do those assessments, back to your question, Representative, I think we can go beyond the 2 or 3 years. I think we can give you a 5 and a 10-year look into the future of what that's going to look like. Capacity on the school side, you never know, but we monitor those trends and we look at those trends. Right now across the state, it's kind of down, but from a condition standpoint, I think we have a pretty solid idea of where we're at. We have annual meetings with the schools, and we have annual meetings with our different state agencies on the CM side, and they are giving us kind of feedback in real time as to what they're seeing in those buildings along with those condition assessments.
So Dale, walk us through what this looks like. I mean, your concept is to retain FEA, right?
Well, I don't know
Or
we go out with an RFP. There's various companies that would do this, but we would look at retaining a consultant. And I think probably the most efficient way and the quickest way to get this done is to hire them to do what I call the plan to plan, or the state strategic plan. And again, we'd have a working group working with them as we do that. ANI has agreed to be the beta test agency for putting this together. So, and they cover a lot of the things that this committee has asked about, such as leasing and things like that other agencies don't. So I think by using ANI as the beta test, we can cover most everything that other state agencies would have. And so put together then a plan or a template off of what comes out of the beta test with ANI, and these are going on at the same time. So as we're building the state plan, we're looking at what ANI does, what they need, and how they're more of a template from them as a strategic plan for their particular agency, or at least a master plan, how that feeds in. So if we're doing it at the same time, I think we can get the state plan right as far as the information that needs to go in there to feed it. I think if you disconnect those, we come down the road here, I think we're going to have some starts and stops as we start to bring the information in from the agencies. So tie that together. And once we have the template, and I think we can get that done in a year's time. Okay. a year's time to get that done. Then the template for the other agencies in UW community colleges, you know, you've asked them, they're interested in this also. To bring them in, they could use that template and and still use a consultant, but not use a consultant side by side with each one of them and drag it out over time. Have them fill in what they need to fill into the template, and the consultant would then also help them. They'd be kickoff meeting. Here's what you need to do. Here's how the template works. If you have questions, call us, or we can get online, help you, that sort of thing. But really put the onus on the agencies working with our department to try and build their own templates to feed into that. Again, I think another year or so to get that done. When Mr. Small testified earlier, he was looking at a longer time frame with all of the agencies, but that was based on working with them individually. Other dialogue that I've had and doing some research on these type of plans, I think if we build the template, we can do it quicker and cheaper on the second phase.
So with A&I, how many buildings are you talking about with them?
It would be their entire fleet. The number I don't have off the top of my head. Suzanne's back here. I don't know if she has it, and I don't know if somebody from A&I is here. But it's a lot of square footage. We're talking just on the state side and the school side, roughly about 43, 44 million square foot for all of these buildings without UW in that. So,
Mr. Chairman, to that question, just in the conversation, make sure that we know where responsibility for maintenance and whatnot of buildings are. So we've got the school side, then you've got the state side that A&I takes care of, leases and the capital and things like that. Then you've got agency owned,
right.
which would be Department of Health with those health facilities, Department of Corrections, YDOT, Game and Fish, or the two commissions, YDOT and Game and Fish, right? So there's a half a dozen individual entities, even though they're all state.
That's correct.
But responsibility falls in different realms, correct?
Yes, and that's correct. And again, I think by choosing A&I, you know, they've got the biggest portfolio. They cross a lot of areas that I think by building that template, that will cover most of those other agencies. If there's nuances to it, say the healthcare side or something, again, that's where the consultant can help that particular agency feed that information in. Now, this also dovetails into the State Building Commission's directive for all agencies to develop a 20-year plan. And so by doing this over the next couple of years, those plans will be developed, and that will also tie into what the SBC has been wanting to do. One of the handouts that we did provide the committee is a breakdown on various agencies that report to the SBC that we have annual meetings with on the state side. And again, on the school side, we have our annual meetings with them also. We've already modified our templates for the meetings with the agencies and for the school districts to try and get some more information on routine maintenance and those sort of things as far as costs, where that's at. One of the things that I've seen in trying to get that data, and I know A&I has been working on that with various agencies, is we all account for it differently. When you look at the cost of routine maintenance in the industry, that includes your labor and those sort of things. So how that labor is accounted for in individual agency budgets, as well as then buying the brooms and the mops and the cleaning supplies and those sort of things. And then in a lot of cases, they consult out some of that work. You know, where do those all lie in the budget process to be able to do that? And I think, again, this overall template will help us recognize what those costs are and what's being spent.
Go ahead.
Are you going to incorporate, so currently, for example, on major maintenance, routine maintenance, if I'm mistaken, correct me, but it really accounts for the physical asset, the building, and really doesn't take into accounting parking lots, lawns, tree care. You look our
Yeah.
tour yesterday with the state fair, the trees there and maintenance of that sort of thing. So you have to pull that, they would have to pull a lot of that out of funds that by formula are really dedicated to the building side. And so would this help address that as well?
Mr. Chairman, I think it will. Again, that depends on how you all would want to fund those projects or see that money. But the new FCA that we did for schools included site also. First time. The new FEA or FCA, Facility Condition Assessment, that we want to do on the state would take that into account. Because the prior studies that were done on the school side, what we found is about 20% of your major maintenance money was being spent outside the building. So when we look at the 2.5, what that accounts for is really what the consultant said is we're funding it at 2% currently. We really need about 2.25 for the building, and the other 0.25 is for everything outside the parking lot, sidewalks, lighting, fencing, controls as far as the lawn care, things like that. And so the new assessment will take that into account. So we'll have that number. And I think, again, that'll help agencies. They get that report. They get that feedback. They'll know what the condition of those things are and moving forward, what those costs would be. So looking at I'm sure when the FCA was done for this building 10 years ago, they probably didn't look at the parking lots out there. That was a separate thing that was being looked at as far as the driving range. The new FCA will take that into account and provide those costs to us and you all.
So I'm looking at your June 5th letter that's in the materials, and it says you're in the 8th year of the facility planning process since the creation of your office.
Right.
What is that? Just explain to us what that means and what else are you going to add on to that, or how is it going to change your current facility planning process?
Mr. Chairman, so it's been 8 years since we started the process. And so when we merged with the CM department of an A&I back in 16, what we did is we took our planners on the school side and we started a similar process over on the CM side where we have the annual meetings. We put together a template that we work with the agencies
CM
on.
meaning construction.
Construction management, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the construction management group. And again, this list of agencies that are on this handout come in on a yearly basis and visit with us about their needs. What do they need for major maintenance work? What's coming up? Forecasting on buildings. Do you have a building master plan? There was work done with health and over the years prior to even that consolidation, laying out kind of a timeline on the Wyoming Life Resource Center, the Evanston Hospital, those sort of things, laying out that plan. So that's all taken into account. And so we look at the money that's available on the major maintenance and try and prioritize their work coming up in the future years. On the school side, it's very similar. So we're trying to bring that planning process together. We recently changed the timelines for that on the school side, which will, I think, help us. We used to start the schools in January and then piggyback right on the end of that in March for the state side on the planning meetings. We've updated that. We changed it starting this year to where they've already had their front end meetings with the district saying, here's the new template, here's the information we want you to fill out, be prepared for our in face-to-face or Zoom type of meeting with the districts. And depending on the size of the district, some of those like Laramie 1, that might take 4 hours to a day to go through that planning process and review all the information with them. And so we're going to kick that off hard in October with the school side, so that helps us in the budgeting process because we're behind the 8 ball by the time we finish this up in April to get started on the commission budget. So it helps us on the front end, gives us a little bit of a break then for all the feedback, because after we go through this plan, the schools review all the information. tell us whether they accept it or not. And the commission, by regulation, rule and reg, has to accept that, those plans. They review those and they have to accept those plans. And so if the districts disagree with what's in the plan, they can come to the commission. On the state side, then we started, like I say, in the March, April timeframe. We'll continue on that same timeframe, but it gives us that lag in between for reporting and budgeting purposes coming up in the future. So a lot of the things that you see going to SBC on major maintenance projects, capital construction, what I would call component level, where maybe we're doing funding a roof or things like that an agency may not have enough major maintenance funds saved up for. Those type of projects follow through this process. So from the very beginning, we understand, along with the agency, to take that side by side to the commission, which ultimately ends up in JAC for a budget request.
So explain the 2% and just for those folks that aren't familiar with what this process is. And you know, to get to 2% basically is a new thing, because when I first started, we were looking for 1.5%.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So the 2% is major maintenance money. Major maintenance is the repair of components generally of the building. It's outside routine maintenance. I think a simple definition of routine maintenance is those reoccurring activities that have a lifespan within a year, year and a half's time. So when you think of that, it's the janitorial work, but it's also changing the filters, maybe greasing pumps and things like that have a reoccurring nature. Maybe it's every 2 months, 3 months, things like that. Major maintenance is changing out larger components into the building. So you could have an HVA system that lasts 20 to 30 years. And major maintenance could be replacing some of the larger pumps on that could be $5,000 to $50,000. But it could also boil down to changing out the boilers and stuff themselves, where we've seen costs of that in excess of $1 million for a building. Roofs, I think, is another good example. 20 to 30-year lifespan could be on the prison. We had replacement when I was director in the past. It was $4 or $5 million for that single roof to be replaced. So big dollar ticket items that have a certain lifespan. The beauty of the new FCA that we're going to do is, as part of that, the consultant will take all the specifications off of those building components. So if you can think of your home furnace, it has the manufacturer, the date and the age of it, what type it is. There's a code on there. All of that comes into play. They have pictures so we can look real time back at the date on when that was taken. All that goes in that drives in that life cycle of major maintenance. So major maintenance, there's been, and this is national information, it's been around for a long time. And basically on the type of building you have and the life cycles of that, these major repairs come predictable on time. There's stuff breaks just like in real life that we all experience prematurely, but typically they'll last a certain time period. So to be able to replace those when they break, the state provides major maintenance funding for both the schools and on the state side. On the school side, as Representative Larson mentioned, by statute, it's 2%. On the state side, we've kind of tried to mirror that. I think the first year I was director, it came in at 1 point something, but then part of that was pulled back. It actually ended up at a 0.06 or 0.07 that 1 year. But it's only been recent that the state has been doing the 2%. It's been something less than that on the state side buildings. But again, they're pretty similar in nature, same components, those sort of things as school buildings.
Go ahead.
But Dale, because a lot of us don't live in your world. Tell us how you get 2% of what?
Okay.
So
yeah.
help us understand why we're funding 2% and 2%. It means what? Okay.
Okay, it's 2% of the cost replacement value, or CRV, of a building. So we look at the total as part of this assessment. What they do is they'll go in and say, to replace this building based on national standards for costs of what's in that building, the type of construction. For example, it varies from an elementary school is a different cost replacement value than a junior high, than a high school. Same thing with office buildings, different types. The hospitals would be much more expensive to replace than a normal office building, and that would be more expensive than a warehouse. So they actually look at the type of facility, put in based on the square footage, the type of construction. They will come up with a cost replacement value if we had to replace that building. Again, based on national standards and costs.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're on the construction side, and we appreciate your passion for construction, but on the routine maintenance side of things, on the state buildings anyhow, that would fall more under the A&I oversight and whatnot. And so how do you anticipate being able to enforce their routine maintenance, for lack of a better term, the enforcement side, when it's really not your agency to tell them to make sure that those furnace filters are changed so that we get the 20 years that you're talking about, or the 30 years you're talking about, to make sure that the pumps are greased and all of that is being taken care of to prevent the premature failure of those kind of systems. So how do you interpret or anticipate those, your two agencies working together? Because again, you're focused on from the construction side coming in, and they're operating it from a different side.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, very good question. So one of the things that that we're currently doing right now, and I hope to come out with an RFP to hire a consultant to do training for anybody that receives state funds for buildings. I hope to come out with the RFP by the end of the year, and this training course is going to be the first setup will probably be hosted in Casper, so it's centrally located. About an 8-hour training course, and it comes down to how do you set up a routine maintenance plan? And from, a national standard, what does that look like? How do you set that up? How do you implement that? What goes into that plan? Then from that, I want to have within this RFP, I'm asking for 3 more Zoom type of meetings, 2 hours in length, that then the feedback we get from facility managers from that will set up certain training courses. And if this all pans out, works like I hope it will, we'll continue those in the future. All of the meetings, including the 8-hour meeting, are going to be videotaped or Zoomed so that we can put it in and host it on our website. So as we have change out in personnel, or folks are like me and you go to a meeting and you have somebody talking to you and you're trying to take notes, you don't catch everything, that you can come back and look, okay, what did he say? How does this plan work? How does that happen? I think the bill you're going to discuss later on today will help define standards in terminology. And if I recall from the bill, it says you shall have a routine maintenance plan for your operations. Again, I think a more formalized process of this would be helpful. As far as oversight from my agency, we don't have that capacity to do that. But one of the things that A&I has done is they have, we have our AIM database. It has different modules. Different agencies can come in and use our module, our bigger programming that we have, capabilities. And A&I has already done that. They've hooked into that. And that information then, again, tied to this new facility condition assessment, will take those barcodes on those various components of a building and actually put out work orders. So it will automatically generate work orders to be able to do that, to say, you need to change this filter on this date. And of course, once that work order goes out, you have to complete that, and that comes back in. So at the end of the day, we potentially could have some oversight in that, because it would feed back into the bigger database that we have. I'm not anticipating that at this point in time. I would leave that up to the agencies. I tell you, the agencies, I don't think they're not trying to do routine maintenance and things, but I think they can use some additional help to get there. I've worked with Facility Force, which is the company that has it used to be called AIM. It's different terminology for it now. I use that because I think you're all familiar with it, the AIM database. But they have modules that we can roll out for individual agencies. On the front end of that, it was about $1 million for the 48 school districts if we wanted to put them on there. And then about $4,000 a year to maintain that per district in the future. But again, it would automatically generate those work orders, send out that information. It comes out on a laptop. It's all electronic. So for the facility folks, it's easier to do that. And so again, I would certainly recommend in the future that we do that on the state side as this plan is rolled out. I think it's inexpensive compared to what the beneficial gain would be. And again, if we come in the strategic plan and take a look at what we need to do with that routine maintenance based on levels for facility type, have that interaction with the database to generate all that stuff, I think it would be there either for the agencies themselves to look at and or monitored through our division also.
So Dale, following up on that conversation with routine maintenance, I believe on the school side, we fund routine maintenance inside the block, then major maintenance is a separate item. So how do we fund routine maintenance for the non-school state-owned buildings, whether agencies or whatever? Where does that funding come from?
That comes through the agency budget requests. A lot of it's in their standard budget unless they need to increase. Then you'll see that ask that comes through the JAC, but it's within their own agency budgets. At YDOT, we just took that when I was there. We just took that out of our own budget, the HO1 account. And so a lot of that was, we had one facility manager per district, and at headquarters, we had 8 or 9 people to take care of all the buildings there. So a lot of that was consulted or contracted out, a lot of that work itself, but.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman, and this might be to Mr. Richards. So like on the state hospital side, that unit is there an operations and maintenance component of the state hospital budget? Don?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I believe there is.
Okay.
That is different than the Department of Revenue, who is housed in the Hirschler building. They would benefit from the custodial and routine maintenance services of A&I.
Right. I was just, thank you for both of you for the clarification. I just didn't have it in my mind that we had that included someplace within their budget. Thank you.
And so just to follow up on that, then my understanding is of what A&I has roughly 400 some odd buildings that they provide routine maintenance for. Is that?
How many buildings does A&I have for routine maintenance? Or that they oversee?
I'd say over 100.
A&I has about 2.3 million square feet, and Suzanne's thinking about 100 different buildings.
Is that owned or owned?
Okay, owned.
So what you're suggesting is, I actually, probably what we're going to need is A&I to come and dovetail with you on your recommendations and your desires for consultants. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is save money and run the process more efficiently on how we spend our money for routine maintenance and major maintenance. Is that fair? I mean, that's the whole point.
Mr. Chairman, that's it. Yes, exactly.
Go ahead.
And just to follow up on that, Del, and the trick of all this is that then with the major maintenance funds and what we put aside, when you have that look ahead, whether it's 5-year, 10-year, then we start funding towards it. But the trick from your side is going to be to, as you look each year on each particular one, so like say this building, In the 5-year plan, it shows this building needs a roof in 5 years. Well, when the 5th year comes, it doesn't need to be done. So that in your
correct.
yearly meeting, the director comes in and says, I don't need this, but I do need some help with the driving range at the parking lot, which isn't supposed to age out for 10 years, but because of the runoff that's coming down that hill, it needs it now. So that's where you play with that number, because for us, at the end of the day, building up that number where some might say you're just building another coffee can, that we have to believe in that number enough that we want to stick with it. The contractors want it, so they know that they can plan ahead, but we know it's a real number, so we don't rate it. That's the trick.
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly right. That's what we do with the yearly plan. We've already rolled this out with the 48 school districts, and that's what we're telling them in these meetings, that just because it's showing that you need a roof in 2 years because your building, it's been on that for 18 years, don't do anything. We're not going to do anything if it doesn't need to be done. And so again, it's a 20-year roof. Sometimes they fail a little bit early. Sometimes you get another 4 or 5 years out of them. If they're doing the assessments that we need to do, and particularly if we're doing them on a 5-year increment, we'll have a better idea of how those are aging out. And so it's a planning tool. It's a planning tool, but I think it's sophisticated planning tool. I'll be honest with you right now. I think it's a little bit of by gosh and by golly. I mean, it's been 5 years since we looked at had a facility condition assessment on buildings. The facility managers are looking at them on a daily basis and they kind of know what's coming. But how does that get fed back to everybody and fed into, again, a funding discussion with the governor's office and the policymakers? And the changes we're doing in the FCA will give us that information. I'd be happy to provide a viewing for this committee as to really real time how this works. We've done that with the commission, with the school districts, with the select committee. So if you serve on that, you've seen that. But I mean, it's really dynamic. And again, with the ability that we now have to make adjustments real time, when you, the legislature, give us money to fix something, we can come back and feed it right in and take care of that. One of the interesting things that we had on the school side, when we had these updates, is that the FCA was done on a district building, and it showed it needed a new roof in about 3 years. And then we were talking to the district, and they said, oh, by the way, 2 months after the facility condition assessment was done on this building, we got hail damage, and they put a new roof on. But ours was still showing it had an old roof. All we did was go in and say, okay, reset it. Now we got another 20 years till this roof comes up. That's what we can do in the future on these. And then I think the other thing I touched on this briefly, but if we can look out ahead and know we have 3 or 4 or 5 roofs coming on different buildings with different agencies coming up, can we do an economy of scale and spread that out into maybe 2 contracts instead of 5 individual contracts and get a better price when we put those out? And I think we can do that with this plan.
Okay. Further questions on this issue? I mean, it's a long, complicated issue. And Dell, I mean, part of the reason we're asking these questions is you're going to have a different committee here in January. And so the education process on you is going to basically start over again. But we're trying to start it now to allow the basic understanding of what our goals and objectives are and what's the best for and the most economical way to run this operation. So.
Yep. And I appreciate those comments, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Anything else?
No, Mr. Chairman. I'll stay up here when Director Westby comes up, I think. And we have, coming back to an earlier comment, Mr. Chairman. So I have been working with A&I side by side. They've agreed to be the beta test. They have come to the previous meetings and expressed that they would certainly take that on. And again, with them already in the system, I think that would be another benefit And when I say the system and the AIM system and using their data, and that's where we'd want to move in the future. I have had a number of conversations with Director Westby and Transportation, and it's been a good conversation. And so again, I appreciate him. When I asked him, hey, can you come to the committee and talk about what they're currently doing at YDOT? And so you have a handout from him, and I think he's next on the agenda. So.
Yeah, we took him off. Okay, go ahead.
Just a comment. As Director Westby maybe makes his way up here, but to say thank you for this very big picture vision. It is a big boat to turn, but you have laid out very compelling reasons why we need to go in this direction in terms of budgeting, supporting of our industries, taking in consideration the changing needs of our school districts and how they teach and how students learn. And I'm really appreciative of what you have laid out before us. I'm excited to see this process start and then be with you through the end, right? However many months or years this takes, knowing that this will benefit multiple generations of Wyomingites in terms of our fiscal planning and our quality of delivery of services. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Darren Westby, Director of Wyoming Department of Transportation. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to Director McComey for our discussions, as well as inviting me to speak today. So thank you again. With me today, I have Tom Dehoff. He's our Assistant Chief Engineer on the operations side of the house, and Justin Huntley is our Facilities Manager for all of our buildings at YDOT. YDOT, we have our mission, which is provide a safe and effective transportation system, and we're in charge of the roads, the bridges, the airports, the emergency communications, and the highway patrol, and all the facilities that support that mission. And so it's critical that we're successful with our mission for the success of the state, not only from the revenue side of the house, but quality of life as well. We're currently working with the Joint Transportation Highways Military Affairs Committee on options that will probably be headed to the Joint Appropriations Committee on some funding streams coming down the road. Over the past 15 years, the state revenue's been pretty flat for YDOT. And so our buying power, as you can imagine, has gone down tremendously. Construction inflation has gone up 40 to 50% in that time frame as well, which just means our miles of roads that we get to maintain has just been shrinking every year. Our federal funds have gone up. They've been climbing with this last federal funding bill, the IIJA. Very fortunate to see a 30% increase in federal funds, but you couple that with our inflation and construction inflation of 40 to 50%, we're lucky to not be going completely backwards on that. We're also not overly optimistic in seeing those federal funds maintain at the current levels. Even this past year, we saw a $30 million decrease in federal funds. And so I'm a little bit worried to see what the next federal funding bill comes out, if we're going to be where we're at today, or if we're going to even be further behind. In 2010, 2009, 2010, the agency went into what we call preservation only mode due to our funding streams. The agency at the time really realized that at some point we cannot continue to build new. We have to start just looking at the funding that we have and try to ensure that what we have to date is maintained. Our investment is significant. Several billions of dollars have been put into our horizontal infrastructure, and we needed to ensure that those investments were maintained. Unfortunately, with that, with the funding streams, we had to probably or at least lower the priority on our vertical infrastructure, our facilities. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what happened, and that's I think what needed to happen at the time, because the amount of people that travel, utilize our transportation system was probably more important in the eyes of the management than making sure that we had a nice facility in which to house our equipment and house our people across the state. Unfortunately, that preservation only mode is still in underway. But I asked the question, you know, what was our exit strategy? How are we going to get out of preservation only mode? We have a lot of potential ideas that we need to get on the road, whether it's improving safety, looking at, well, this road here, if you're heading north to Gillette, Highway 59 is one that keeps being brought up to me on a regular basis. What are we doing about that road? Well, I, in good conscience, can't spend money on something that I can't maintain into the future. And so, like I said, we're working with the Joint Transportation Committee on some solutions that hopefully will be heading your way, in hopes that we can get out of just trying to spread that peanut butter and to the point where it's so thin that it's not actually doing any good. So how does the vertical construction fit into the strategy? You know, how can we get our facilities back into the conversation? You start looking at some of our older buildings. I know you said one building is older than you. I think I have some buildings that's older than your grandpa. But you know, our facilities were built when the highways were being constructed. And so you think about the equipment back in the day when those facilities were built. Most of our buildings that we have out there now can't house the equipment that we use today. And so from a mission perspective, how can we perform our mission properly if all of our equipment's sitting outside and on a blizzard snow day when we have to get out and maintain the road and plow the road, and some of our equipment isn't working, we just can't perform that mission as well. And so again, it goes back to that level of service. I know Director McComey talked about that level of service. How do we want to proceed with our mission to ensure that we can effectively perform for the citizens and the traveling public? So enter the facility assessment and facility improvement plan that we're putting together. We need to, like Del said, we need to know where our facilities stand now. We need to know what we need in the future, and then we have to develop that plan and how to get there. And that includes not only with the facility condition assessment, but also what are the future needs of our agency and the traveling public. We need to know critical deferred. We have to have those lists and costed out and strategically planned. And then, you know, that long range, a lot of conversation about routine maintenance. I 100% agree. We have to ensure that we budget appropriately to routinely maintain these buildings so they don't hit to a critical level or utilize or have the ability to utilize the major maintenance side of the house to strategically plan for that roof replacement or that HVAC replacement to where it doesn't completely devastate the routine budget. You know, right now, as was said, we are not on the capital construction bill. When we need facilities or we need major renovations, we are not on that. That's something that the director and I have been talking about. How do we reinsert us back into that to ensure that we're not taking significant amounts of money off of the roads to put into facilities? Look at our major maintenance. Right now, we're funding our major maintenance through the highway fund, the state highway fund. I'll go back on the federal dollars. I said we got an increase. Those can't go towards maintenance. Those have to go on the roads for, you know, significant maintenance or construction. So I can't utilize those federal funds to plow the road. I can't utilize those funds to repair a roof or an HVAC system.
So you're talking about the IIJA funds, the 500 million that you get over 5 years, roughly.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
And so when did you hire FEA? And the report says they're about 75% complete.
I'm gonna bring up Justin and Tom, Mr. Chairman. They've been the two that have been running this contract the best and can answer a lot of the questions a lot better than I can.
Chairman, Justin Huntley, State Facilities Program Manager for YDOT. We reached out for RFP late last year and we awarded that contract early in the spring. And we are about 75% through the planning phase of that. The deliverables being a fully laid out a strategic plan and a roadmap for us to go forward.
So my question is, you know, you're funded 90+% through federal dollars, and not a lot from the general fund or from us. You've always asked for more money from us, and we've always said no as a practical matter. And so the general concept is you hire FEA to demonstrate why you need more money. And if we don't have the money, then we've got to find it someplace else, or we got to take it from somebody else. So in order to know that your FEA report is not just another way to justify more money, I think we need to know what your contract says, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what your deliverables that you asked for. So we know that you're not basically just finding another way to ask for more money. So how do you respond to that question? Because other than, you know, we're the money guys, we're not the other committees that you know, help you get to where you need to go. We're basically your roadblocks.
Mr. Chairman, to try to answer your question the best that I can, regardless of where the funds come, we need to do this correctly. And that's the whole point of why we wanted to do this. If we get $0 from the general fund or from this committee or the legislature, we still need to do it. Therefore, we will take it off the roads. We will spread that peanut butter a little bit more thin to ensure that we can get back to the point in which we can perform our mission with our equipment and with the facilities that are out there. I think the words have been said several times, this could save us money. Well, if you perform routine maintenance on a regular basis, if you perform and strategize with when to perform the major maintenance timely, that will save us money. And so that's the intent with this plan, is to ensure that we get on at least the plan. I can't remember the word you used, something, gosh or golly. You know, I think we very reactionary, unfortunately, right now. And I think our funding streams have forced us to be that way. We lowball the budget until something bad happens, then we have to go find the money, take a project possibly off the STIP to execute that contract to get that done. What we're trying to do with this strategic plan is to ensure that we can be as most efficient with the funds that we have, regardless of the revenue stream. Our funds are just as sacred as everybody else's funds, and we just want to make sure that what Justin and Tom and their teams are doing across the state are planned and very strategic to where we can, perform our mission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Westby, I don't know if this is a question for you and maybe back to Mr. Richards, but when we completely took White off the general funder for the most part back in 17 or 18, I forget. Prior to our current situation, did we fund your major maintenance and your capital construction in the general fund? Do you know?
Mr. Chairman, and I don't know if Don has the exact answer, but I can go back 2014. I was going to say we have one guy that probably can tell you exactly. I know in 2014, we received a fuel tax increase 10 cents fuel tax. That was a $45 million revenue that came into the highway department. We also saw about a $45 million decrease in general funds. In 2018, I believe, we saw a decrease. 2018, 2019, we saw an increase in registration fees and a decrease, a commensurate amount of decrease in general funds. So regardless of what those funds were, I couldn't tell you the state funds that were coming in, general funds that were coming in were actually earmarked for major maintenance or routine maintenance.
Representative Larson, Mr. Chairman, the state general fund supported horizontal construction when the legislature appropriated, and those were sizable, in excess of $100 million some biennia.
And so then, Mr. Chairman and Dawn, then they funded their capital construction needs from internal funds.
So what's the definition of horizontal and vertical?
Mr. Chairman, maybe the nomenclature isn't quite right, but vertical is buildings and horizontal would be roads.
I concur.
And so part of this process is, just common sense. And frankly, for me, we have better roads than every state around us, because I travel those roads fairly frequently. So how do you address that issue? I mean, you keep saying now you're a $500 million short on your biannual budget. And yet we have better roads than the states around us. So explain how you would address that particular perception.
Mr. Chairman, it's a great question. I too travel quite a bit, especially south. Probably the quickest trip to the airport. But how I would address it is we're spreading that peanut butter. What unfortunately, from a perception standpoint, what you see is a nice road, meaning we may have just went over it with a fog seal and put new stripes on it. It looks really nice. All that did was protect it and hopefully stretch that road another 5 years before we had to do anything else. You look at some of the work that we've been doing under the preservation only mode, instead of going in and reconstructing a road down to the sub base, making sure that we get a good sub base, come back over it with a complete new surfacing on top of that to ensure that we can get maybe a 20-year life out of that reconstruct. We go in and we shave it down. We put in another 2 inches of overlay, put in a nice chip seal on top of that, maybe a wearing course and some new stripes. Well, that probably isn't only going to last 5 to 7. And so unfortunately, from the preservation only mode mentality is not allowing us to make the appropriate decisions when it comes to cost benefit analysis, life cycle cost, to where if we had the appropriate funding, we would probably not do the shave and pave, the mill and overlay, sorry, engineers. We would probably look at the opportunities of, instead of doing something that would only last 5 to 7 years, let's do something that could last 20, 21 years, 22 years, in hopes that we don't have to be back there to do that kind of surfacing. So I agree, our roads are good. Can they be better? Absolutely. Right now, like I said, I can't say that our roads are unsafe. I think our roads are some of the safest in the country. Can they be better? We talked a lot, I think, last year about 287 South out of Laramie and about some of the improvements that could be made there. Well, we don't have the funding to do that. We don't have the ability to make those decisions appropriately. So again, we have to prioritize what we have and what needs to be done, which is let's maintain our investment. So that's the crux. It's kind of a sidestep of what we're here to talk about today, but I appreciate the question for sure.
Sure. So as a new director, I can point you to where $50 million of your needed maintenance money is. It's in a brand new interchange in Sheridan. that I didn't feel needed to be built. But the engineers insisted it doesn't meet our criteria. It was designed in 1958 and doesn't meet current criteria. And they were in maintenance mode and they insisted on rebuilding that interchange. There was nothing wrong with the old interchange, except it didn't meet current design criteria. $50 million bucks that could have gone into maintenance. And so I would ask you to re-examine how they pick and choose their priorities, because I still see projects going on that, you know, why are they doing this if they don't have the money to do basic maintenance? So I'd urge you to take a look at how they pick and choose the projects, because some of these rebuilds, because it doesn't meet current code, those just have to be set aside and go out and make sure you fix the potholed roads first the way they need to be fixed. I've been hearing about this maintenance mode only for so long, and yet I'm sorry, but that interchange, it's just a burr under my saddle. I still don't understand why we had to do that at a time when I'm hearing YDOT cry crocodile tears that they can't do ordinary maintenance. So I'd urge you to take a look at how they pick and choose which projects they undertake. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
So tell us about this particular project.
I'm sorry.
Tell us about this project, because, I mean, the co-chair brought it up, and you know, this is exactly what we're trying to get at. How do you manage this type of an approach or response to what YDOT does? Because as long as this is your response from the legislature or for communities, you're not going to get more money.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman, I appreciate that. And I know you and I have had these conversations before as well. I know our team through the State Transportation Improvement Plan goes through a 6-year planning cycle. They do, we have a pavement management system. We have a bridge management system, as well as our federal standards that we have to live by, which if you're not impressed with that intersection in your district, we're going to have a significant one coming up right now with the I-80, I-25 interchange, which is probably a factor of 10 on top of that one. That one is old and antiquated. The turning circles on the on and off ramps are so much that we're seeing overturn vehicles on it regularly. And when it was built and designed, it did not, well, it met the standards of the size and vehicles of that were on the road at the time. Not to mention the amount of vehicles that are on the road at the time. And so now flash forward 50 years, vehicles are longer, vehicles are bigger, turning radiuses need to be larger. The amount of volume that we have right now, we're already probably 10 years behind on that. And so it's a multitude of factors that go into project selection. I know the intersection up there, I don't know that one specifically as well as I've been involved in the I-25, I-80 interchange and know everything that's gone through it.
So what you're saying is, because you are using federal dollars to do this, when you make those changes, there are certain guidelines that you have to use when you make these interchange development projects that are mandated upon you. Is that a fair statement?
Mr. Chairman, I would say yes, and Tom he's been around this, well, shoot, we probably have one that's been here longer with Highway Department. The answer is yes. I mean, most of those projects that we utilize federal dollars with, it's a 90-10 match, so it's 90% federal, normally 10% stateside on those. But yes, there's regulations that go into projects such as that from the federal side.
Mr. Chairman, the director is correct. When we reconstruct something, we have to bring them up to the AASHTO design standards that we have adopted in order to receive that federal money. So that is correct. And then also, when you're rebuilding an interchange or a bridge, there's a lot into there because that will probably be there for 100 years. So we are projecting the volumes out to 20 years, 30 years to make sure that that does not become obsolete for the amount of money that you are spending. And then we also work with all the locals there, the city, the county officials. I'm sure Senator Kaniski, there was a lot of discussion, and that project probably took a lot of years to get to that point. I'm not saying, he didn't think it was needed, but there is a NEPA process that we do follow for that, and we do that for all. As the director has mentioned, being in preservation mode, you do not see those type of projects right now. When we're setting up our STIP, we're not widening shoulders, we're not adding passing lanes. We are totally just, doing the mill and overlay or shave and pave, as the layman says, but yes.
So in the legislature, we shave and bathe, it's kind of the same thing.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Go ahead.
So let me make sure I understand. Am I hearing you say that your federal dollars are so restricted that these dollars can only be used for an interchange reconstruction and cannot be used on anything else? You could not use those dollars for maintenance instead?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, we can use them to maintain the road, i.e. a shave and pave or a mill and overlay. We can use those on new construction, like a new bridge or a new intersection. What we can't use those dollars for is to fix a pothole, to pay the snowplow driver, to buy equipment, to plow the roads. That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Mr. Co-Chair. So you could, so this Cheyenne interchange, it's now going to cost $500 million. You said 10 times what the Sheridan one. You could make the decision to spend those dollars on maintenance, not potholes, but on rebuilding a road that needs to be rebuilt instead of having a shave and pave. You could spend those dollars on those other projects, or are you restricted to $500 million that can be used only for an interchange rebuild?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, we could use, it depends. If we went out for a discretionary grant like we would on the I-80, I-25 interchange, I need to find out the funding stream for that intersection that you're talking about to see if there was a discretionary grant for that. But the standard formula funds that we get from the federal government, the IIJA funds, could go to a mill and overlay, a reconstruct, or a new intersection, or a new bridge. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Co-Chair, the reason I'm pursuing it again still is I heard the same thing about the Sheridan interchange. The turning radius is too small, all kinds of accidents. The data didn't support that there were a whole lot of accidents. I said, just put a sign that says stupid truck drivers, slow down, tight turning radius. It'd save a whole hell of a lot of money. But instead we had to rebuild the thing because some people don't know to slow down when they're coming off the interstate. There's no fix for stupid. But instead we spent $50 billion so people wouldn't have to slow down when they come off the interstate. I'll let it go at this point, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you.
So I would like to follow up on the discretionary funding. So you apply for particular projects, and then you have to use the money for that project, and that's over and above your standard dollars that you receive. So I take it that that's what the Sheridan interchange was a discretionary funds. So you had to spend it on that project, and that was over above your standard federal dollars coming in. Is that fair?
Do you know? Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not 100% sure on that Sheridan intersection project, if it was a discretionary project or not. The I-80, I-25 will definitely be one. We don't have enough formula funds to do that project. Some of the other projects that we did expand capacity, truck parking at Wheelie Dome and at Fort Steele, that was a discretionary. We had to use it there. The truck passing lane on I-80 was an expansion project as well, but that was a discretionary grant. We had to spend it on doing that, but that was us going after and hustling that extra discretionary dollars that were coming in versus utilizing our formula fund.
Well, I mean, this is a sidetrack conversation, but I think these are conversations you need to have with us and with other legislators. If you need, more than what we're currently funding on the state highway department. And you know, when I came into the legislature initially, I think the gas tax had failed probably 10 years in a row. And then finally it went through for 10 cents. That brought us up, and we're still lower than most states around us on the gas tax. But that's really the only source of revenue. It's something similar to that in order to effectuate what you're talking about. And good luck on it, because we know what the temperature is around the state of Wyoming for more than another gas tax. It's a quagmire, but education is the only solution to this on your part, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to get back to what we're at here. As far as maintenance goes, because the discussion we're having, and I think it bears repeating, is like, if your facilities are degrading to a point, and by just, you know, throwing duct tape and baling wire around them, only is going to get you to a point where we're going to be in a massive failure, which is going to take a massive amount of money to fix. And if we don't do that, then the equipment's going to be wearing out faster because it's not being stored correctly, and on and on and on. And so we need to figure out a way to get there. And on the building side, we're talking about doing a bigger program. And I take it that's what you all are doing. And you're honing in on a number. And once again, it's just the same thing. We have to sell this to the members, saying that this is a worthy expense, because the chairman's right. I don't see gas tax raises in our future. Maybe this is the time to ask, and maybe this is the time to peg it specifically towards this maintenance, so that way it frees up the money to put the money on the roads that we want. And I do drive a lot, and I got to tell you what, I think I need a new suspension system after driving across Colorado. And as far as Mr. Co-Chair, as far as how they feel in Sheridan about that interchange, I can tell you, in my county, this guy walks on water for what he did in our community this summer. And so that's why, you know, there's a lot of love. Maybe not this week, but most every other week. They're doing a little repaving right now. That's kind of got a little people upset. But as far as fixing the road this summer and where you got the money, it just seemed to come out of, you know, I know it just came out of every nook and cranny to help us in our time of need, and it was greatly appreciated. So I'll look forward to hearing what you're looking for. But there are two co-chairs are right. This is a tough solve. This is a tough one. But I know people in Wyoming, I know the legislature is smart enough to see the value in preventative maintenance. That's why we're going through this on the building side, because it is worth it. So let's keep working on it.
Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chair, I will say, Senator Guru, that I think the situation in your county was YDOT absolutely at its best. And I did send a note down to the state engineer, formerly our district engineer, congratulating him on being able to put that together so quickly.
Yeah.
Director McComey and Director Westby, that's in your presentation, that's why I kept bringing up that it's not just schools and A&I. We've got Game and Fish, we've got YDOT, we've got corrections, we've got this list that you had on here. And so correct me, Director Westby, but I believe in my hometown in Lander, there's not enough room at that facility. We have to store most of our mobile equipment and accessories outside out of town, you know, and let's hope that it's not too cold so that they all start in the morning. And so addressing this ongoing thing really impacts your agency and your ability to allow people to get from point A to point B. Is that a fair assessment?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, it is, and it's fortunately we have a handful of newer buildings that can house the equipment. In your district, we have a few that aren't capable of doing so, unfortunately, and it does come down to mission, right? So, how can we provide a good, safe, and effective transportation system if we're scared if our trucks aren't going to start and get people from A to B? You're absolutely right.
Okay, other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say we haven't mentioned at all much about safety. We've talked about the horizontal highways, but one I'd like to bring up is the deer fencing and the underpasses and overpasses we put in. That has really made a big difference. I come up from Colorado and there's dead animals all over the road, come up to Bags, and all of a sudden Wyoming has taken care of that problem and I don't have to worry about hitting a deer. It's a wonderful thing we've done. I hope we can continue doing that in the state. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just one final comment on what YDOT's doing. So, we've been asked by the committee to include, bring on other agencies. We normally don't deal with YDOT, one of those. Again, the director and I have had a number of conversations. I think with where they're at in the strategic planning, would be a pretty tight fit, an easy fit, to feed their information into the overall state strategic plan. So again, that transparency, where they're at, what their goals are, I think would fit into the overall plan that would come before, again, the SBC. And then the Select Committee on School Facilities, they'll be seeing this. And then you are the committee that I report to. You're my home committee. So you would see that overall plan as it filters in, rather than kind of sitting on the outside trying to explain it alone. So I think kudos to YDOT in the fact that what they're doing right now, I think, puts them ahead on that side. They have a management system also. It isn't the AIM system we're in, but they have a management system, similar to what A&I has. And again, that's one of the reasons I chose A&I. They have a more mature system. They have a lot of square footage and a lot of varied type of square footage, that when we bring in a comprehensive state plan, that would be out there for everybody to look at also.
Well, and as I understand it, was it the 1950s or 1960s when they took whiteout out of the, where you became your own overseer, and the appropriations no longer reviewed your budgets with scrutiny. And the reason for that, as I understand it, was because of the political actions from the legislature, where they were building roads in their communities versus having a kind of a non-discretionary process. And so that's how you became basically regulation on your own. But I've been on appropriations now for 12 years, and I keep thinking, like the good coach here, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And so we've been, over the last few years, bringing you in and having you present to us just for informational services, so that we better understand what you do and how you do it. And I think that's a necessary process in order to give us a comfort zone that you're spending your money wisely and on the right projects, and educating us through the process. So that's part of the reason why you're here today. And so we appreciate your time. And, but it's important that you hear and get feedback so that you know how to address those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we do appreciate the opportunity to get in front of you as well.
Mr. Chairman, Tamara will present the bill, but I just remind the committee that this is a bill that we talked about previously, and it is similar to the bill that we passed last year on conforming the construction amendments throughout statute. Last year, you recall that we made an attempt to control or incentivize routine maintenance to prevent premature major maintenance expense. That seemed to be the demise of the bill in the Senate. And so that's been pulled out of this bill, but it fits in the intent of what we did in that bill last year fits well into what Director McComey just presented to us, and I think will be addressed through that strategic planning in the future. And so having that removed out of this bill, you'll recall with having a penalty if you didn't do routine maintenance, and then having to do that, that's gone out of this bill. But then much of this is what we saw last year. So Mr. Chairman, we'll just let Tamara go ahead and present the bill.
Members of the committee. My name is Tamara Revely, and I worked on this bill last year for the Joint Appropriations Committee, and I've worked on it again this year. I'll try to provide a broad overview because I know it's kind of long and you've been through it a few times, and it might just be easier to talk about it a little bit first. So what this bill affects is capital construction, and that includes major maintenance. It affects routine maintenance and strategic planning. Who this bill affects are the state agencies and state-owned buildings, the University of Wyoming, the community colleges, and school districts. And there are 4 major concepts or provisions within the bill. And the first is to codify budget bill provisions related to major maintenance and capital construction. So this was one of the desires of the Joint Appropriations Committee when they started working on this, was to pull some of those things out that are in section 308B, C, and D of the budget bills and have been for several bienniums, and to put them in statute, just to clean things up a bit. And what those provisions are that are being codified is to say that major maintenance funds do not automatically revert at the end of the biennium, to mandate the use of that SBC's major maintenance formula, and then to require reporting on expenditures and commitments. So that would save you some room in your budget bill if you were to codify those. And those changes take up a couple pages. It's page 3, 13, 16, 17, 37, and 14. And we can flip through those when I explain the bill if you'd like. Then the second concept was to use consistent technology across all of those entities that I talked about, the University of Wyoming, community colleges, school districts, and state agencies, to conform terminology. Things like capital construction project, major maintenance, capital renewal, renovation, routine maintenance, and property across all those different entities. The third major concept of the bill is to implement routine maintenance requirements. Entities would be required to develop and implement proactive maintenance schedules, including planning for funding and detailed record keeping. Then finally, I guess it's a catch-all, 4th category of what this bill does is some modernization and some specific changes to policy. One, it eliminates the phase-in for community college major maintenance, and that is in the repeal section on page 43, and this is not currently being done. There's no phase-in. The 7-year phase-in for major maintenance funding isn't being used. Second, it updates contracting provisions for rules for contracting with non-resident contractors on public works. And that's on one page, on page 19. Then it creates a mechanism for supplemental funding. This would permit additional requests when funds are not adequate for major maintenance. Would envision allowing a supplemental funding aspect. There are some specific provisions for community college construction, and then there's the specific piece that's new to this bill, this interim, and that's statewide strategic planning. So again, that was the what and the who, and the 4 major things were to codify, to use consistent technology, to bring in routine maintenance, and then to modernize and make some policy changes. I can walk you through the bill page by page, or I can take you through where each of these 4 provisions are. The bill is kind of long and it's a bit choppy because you'll have the university and then the state agencies and then the school districts and then the community colleges. And for each of these entities, we're trying to do the same things that I just talked about.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that we just do it per concept.
Okay.
Rather than page by page.
Great. Well, then let's just look at the provisions that are codified from the budget bill. The first provision you'll find on page 3. This relates to the University of Wyoming, and subsection B and C are create sections to codify that budget building process for developing a list of what needs to be constructed and then making funding recommendations for major maintenance and using that formula that is in statute currently for community colleges. That's that 95107G.
And Tamara, historically, we've been putting that in a section 300, correct?
That's right. You'll find that in this year's budget bill in section 308. Then the next codifying provision occurs on page 13. This is the reversion of funds. What you've been doing in your budget bills is when you appropriate funds for major maintenance, you specify that they shall not revert and may be used for other major maintenance, that they should be used for major maintenance that they were appropriated for, but if there's any left over, use them for other major maintenance. And this codifies that by going into our statutes that control the reversion of funds at the end of the fiscal biennium. So it continues on to page 14 and just says that funds that don't revert include those for major maintenance for state property, community college property, and the University of Wyoming, that they may be used for expenses for major maintenance. This doesn't include school districts because their major maintenance funds are handled a little bit differently, with them being allowed to keep them in a separate account and expend them as provided in statute. The next codifying provision is on page 16. This is the State Building Commission's directive to adopt a formula for major maintenance for community colleges. This bill draft amends that language to expand it to all state property, community colleges, and the University of Wyoming. And then it's the same formula as has been in statute, just expanded to those other buildings. The next change is on the next page, page 17, to codify the reporting requirement. When you appropriate major maintenance funds, you ask for a detailed report on the expenditures and commitments that are made from the funds appropriated. This just puts that in statute rather than in the budget bill section 308. So those are the major codifying provisions. Then there's some conforming throughout, but those are the major changes.
So before we go on, I think it would be helpful to reacquaint the committee about how this bill came to pass. And so we kind of call this the Lloyd Larson Manifesto, because he probably spent, I don't know, 2 or 3 months last year putting this thing together and meeting with the various agencies, trying to make the actions that we do in the legislature more transparent, more open, and have a better understanding of where and how dollars are spent. So Representative Larson, if you can kind of give us the background of this thing, I think it would be useful.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I think there's two things that we're trying to accomplish in this bill. The first is, if you're a contractor or an agency and you're considering a major maintenance or a capital construction project, you have to be very knowledgeable of our green books, because definitions for routine maintenance for community colleges could be different than what it is for state construction or for schools. When you would think, if you're new to the world, you would think that major maintenance is major maintenance, and that goes into routine maintenance and renovation and all of those definitions. So really, this was a carry forward from an exercise we'd done, 5 years ago, when we really codified our contracting statutes. This is codifying and conforming all of these definitions so that our construction department and our agencies and our contractors who are engaged in the process can read a definition and know that it means the same thing throughout our statutes. And the reason they were so much different is because they were adopted by rule, or one was put in place 1 decade and another was created in another statute a decade later. And we've just kind of gone through and done a house cleaning to do that. The other component of that was 2 years ago, 2 years ago, when this committee was looking into interim topics, we were looking about how to make sure that our major maintenance dollars and reporting of major maintenance was being done, was not being abused, maybe would be the frank way to say that. And that we weren't putting off routine maintenance and then capturing premature replacement of major components because we hadn't been doing our routine maintenance. So in last year's bill, you'll recall that we had a provision and we created this reporting system that everyone seemed to accept, to say that feels fine and is reasonable. But then part of the Larson Manifesto was that if we find out that you have not been doing your routine maintenance and the component fails prematurely, then you're going to have to cover part of the major maintenance to replace it. That caused angst with our schools, with our state agencies, and it's still a conversation that I think is worthy of conversation, but the diplomatic approach from Director McComey, I think, is the better way to resolve that than what we had in that bill and in the short time frame to get that implemented. So, never being known for my diplomacy, we pulled that out of this bill because the conforming of the definitions and the getting the section 300s out of the budget bill into statute, getting the deferred major maintenance when a new state building is built, is a community college building is built, were something that was agreed on and everybody felt was a reasonable approach moving forward. So I hope that explains kind of where this bill got to.
Okay, go ahead, Tim. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I'll pick up on that second piece then that the bill does, and that is to conform technology or terminology. On pages 6, we begin the conforming of definitions. And then throughout the remainder of the bill, we just point to these definitions. And so if you change them here, which is for the state construction department and the state construction department title, if you change them here, you'll also change them for the university and for community colleges, because most of the bill is just conforming and pointing to these definitions and using the same words everywhere. So we point to these definitions correctly. And I won't take you every page that a conforming change is made, but it is the majority of this bill. And what you really need to focus on are these new definitions. And what we've done is taken existing definitions where they exist, whether in statute for different entities or in rule or regulations for what's actually done in practice, and tried to put those in statute. So page 6 creates a definition of capital renewal, which is generally defined as those systems externals that have a higher cost than major maintenance. Page 7 is major maintenance or major building and facility repair and replacement. This definition took 3 definitions from existing statute and kind of combined them and made them a bit broader so it could apply to any kind of property owned by a university or the community colleges or state entities. And within that major maintenance definition, there's a couple categories defined. There's code compliance, site improvements, and system improvements. Then on page 10 is a definition of property to just generally mean a building, facility, or site, and a new definition of renovation and routine maintenance. So those are the definitions that would apply throughout the entire bill, and then those are done in numerous changes throughout.
So just to clarify that, Tamara, these definitions are essentially a compilation of what's already in rule and regulation with some additives or better language. Is that fair?
They were already in existence in statute and in rule with different variations of the definition. We conformed it to where the definition is all the same.
That's right. It's not a copy and paste, Mr. Chairman. It did take a lot of work from Representative Larson and the stakeholders and then on both floors to tweak these to try to get the wording such that it would work for all kinds of buildings and facilities and capture the things that was intended to be captured.
And so in the process last year, my recollection is you took this to the various agencies and had each of them kind of comment and work through the drafts to basically tie up all of the loose ends. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman, and we've sent a copy of this bill out to those entities as well. And we worked with Department of Construction, and we reached out to schools, the university and colleges. The only feedback that I got was from the university, their physical representative, Mr. Mai, liked the changes that we made, but had not run it past the trustees at that point. But he thought he liked the changes that we made, and we hadn't heard anything back from the school side or so we're taking those as all as positive comments.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so that'll move us on to the third major concept this bill puts forth is routine maintenance requirements. And the first example of that is on page 4. This creates those routine maintenance requirements for the University of Wyoming. And you can read them all here on page 4 for UW because they are the same then on pages 15 and 16 for the state and page 30 for the schools and page 38 for community colleges. So if you want to read them all here in one place, this is just a create section for the University of Wyoming, and it directs the Board of Trustees to develop and implement schedules for routine maintenance that are designed to eliminate backlogs and establish proactive maintenance practices, ensuring that components, equipment, and systems reach their full life expectancy. Paragraph 2 is to plan for the funding of major maintenance. And then paragraph 3 is to maintain records of major maintenance. And then if you want to flip to page 15 and 16, you'll see the same changes made for the State Building Commission and their rules for state buildings. And same thing on page 30. We work in those same requirements for school districts through the school district facility plans, and then page 38 for community colleges.
So one of the questions I had when I reviewed this bill again is, so I'd like comments from you, Del, in the implementation of this bill. Is it gonna, are you gonna, do you have sufficient personnel to do it? I mean, and because the requirements are fairly significant, or is it already taking place in an informal manner? So if you can comment on that.
Mr. Chairman, in the bill last year, if we'd have to go out and look at major component failures and address that, that would have taken either some additional work on our part, certainly, and or hiring consultants to do that, depending on what the component failure was. We don't necessarily have people that are experts in, say, HVAC to make that determination. That's out of this bill, so we don't have that issue moving forward. On the school side, all of their expenditures on major maintenance come through us, and we actually have to look at those and say it meets the definition of statute. And the schools are required to file what's termed a 680 report on a yearly basis. That is where they're spending that money, and that comes in. That report is actually provided to you and the select committee. So we already do that on the school side. On the state side, major maintenance funding, again, we work through that annual process on where the agencies are going to spend that, and our construction management division is integral in that part on the state agency side. On the UW side, that's a pass-through, community colleges that goes through, but those larger projects, like my staff is sitting back there, they can correct me, but we work with the community colleges on their major maintenance, stuff already. So we have an idea of what's going on, and all of that is cataloged then into our AIM database. So we have that historical data going back in time on those projects also.
So answer is no.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I think we're in a good place personnel wise.
Okay, go ahead, Tim.
Those are the first three major concepts that the bill did. This fourth kind of catch-all category of things in the bill include what we've talked about today, strategic statewide planning. That's on the bottom of page 12 and the top of page 13. A fairly simple new requirement in paragraph 12 to develop and maintain a 20-year statewide strategic facility plan and comprehensive system for monitoring and reporting appropriations and expenditures for capital construction projects and routine maintenance for state property, community college property, and the University of Wyoming property. That's new this interim and fairly succinct. The next change that doesn't really fit in the other categories are on the resident contractor preference for public works. This is on page 19. And what statute previously provided for any public entity, so states and agencies, university, community colleges, local governments, for any public entity letting a contract for a public work, if an advertisement for a bid is not required, then it should be let to a resident of the state. Then it must be let to a resident of the state. This change on page 19, lines 15 through 18 would say that if the services are not offered by a known resident, then the public entity may let the contract to a non-resident.
Go ahead.
This little section seems to cause the most question of any of them in the bill. And I would just, if you go and look at that section of 166102, there's a monetary limit there that determines whether you have to have a bid, or if you can do, or if you don't have to do a bid. And this is really addressing in that event when you don't have to have a bid, when you can go out. We still want them to use contractors in the state, but if they know if you're gonna build a swimming pool or repair a swimming pool and there isn't anyone in the state, you can go out to an entity out of state. What we were trying to correct, and we heard this from our airport folks in Rock Springs last year, was that, okay, I know that there's not one in the state, but as written, I have to get it through the state. So then I go through a contractor in the state who then goes to the contractor out of state, and it ends up costing us more. And so we're trying to give that flexibility to address that.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, also on this topic of public works and public contracts, on page 20, the committee added an emergency provision such that if there's an emergency in contracting for public works, the public entity may waive any applicable requirement of this section if the requirement is endangering the health, welfare, or safety of the public. And this was an amendment requested by this JAC committee before the bill was introduced, and I believe it was modeled on an emergency requirement for our professional services statutes. So those are the contracting clauses. There are also some specific provisions for community colleges, and you'll find this on page 43. This new subsection in that I believe generally is a codification of what the Community College Commission has been doing in their rules and regulation, but requiring districts to fund not less than 50% of the costs of capital construction projects from sources other than state general funds for new construction or renovation. And then clarifying that that does not include contingency costs and administrative costs. And then the final major kind of modernization of statutes is to repeal that 7-year phase in. And you'll see the repealer is actually on page 43 in section 3. Then the text of the repealer is within 2115-109. I'm sorry, 2118-222, and the text is there on page 45 for you. The other repealers are just to repeal definitions that are conflicting with what's now created in this bill draft. I guess I should also mention that the bill draft, based on committee action on the floor when the bill was introduced, there's a section 5 that clarifies the project. The bill would not apply to the University of Wyoming student housing, the law school project, the War Memorial West Stands project, or the Aquatic Center project. Then the bill would be effective July 1st, 2025, except that the entities could begin rule drafting immediately.
On that section 5, you'll recall last year when we put that section 5 in, it's because when we put all of those capital construction projects together over at the university, we had used some major maintenance dollars there, and that conflicted with what we allowed major maintenance dollars to be used in that previous bill. We probably don't need the section 5, but it doesn't hurt anything either.
Then finally, after the bills were published for everyone, more internal review noted that we might go ahead and repeal, at least it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and repeal those provisions in the budget bill, in the 2024 budget bill that was adopted that you'll be amending this year through the supplemental budget. Go ahead and repeal those provisions in section 308 so you don't have them two places. I'm not sure it's strictly necessary, but I think it might be a good change if you want to move this bill forward.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would think, I'm back on page 43 with the N paragraph. I would think there'd be an outcry statewide of the community colleges having to come up with 50% of a capital construction project. I know in Casper, we don't rely on the state for money for building buildings on the college campus, but every other community college, it's almost 100% funded by the state. So has the community college group seen this and not objected?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
that's existing rule. That's not new. We're just putting it in statute.
So, I mean, what,
Camera, is that not in rule now?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, this was sent to us when you were working with the former director, Director Caldwell, and the language does appear, I think, in their guide for community college districts and how they can submit funding requests. And for this type of project, it says that it must be funded 50% non-state. I think maybe our budget and fiscal team could comment on historically how close to accurate that comes in and what you decide to fund as the legislature. This previously and was controlling how the requests were made. Make sure you have 50% funding costs known from a source that's not state funds, but how you choose to fund those in the budget bill. Let me see if they can comment on that.
Mr. Co-Chair. I'm sorry, Tamara, I missed what you said. Did you say it is in a rule now?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's the community colleges policies for or their guidelines for budget requests. I don't believe it's in their promulgated rules.
Don?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that is correct. Your actions by the legislature are not bound by the requests, and you certainly have seen examples where different colleges receive different amounts of funding, And there are in fact cases, as Senator Anderson points out, Western Wyoming College, you'll recall, required a entire rehabilitation of their electrical systems and other, the JAC and the legislature at that time deemed that to be an entire state cost. So it was not funded with any local match, as one example.
And Mr. Co-Chair, I'm with Senator Anderson. I think it's one thing to have policy guidance and it's another to bake it into statute. I'm not a big fan of this provision on page 43.
Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in previous years, this was actually even more aggressive against community colleges, in which in the budget bill, when we would do these things, we said that if there were any cost savings, the first dollars came back to the state and not to the community colleges. And then that language has since been removed over time. But for years, the community colleges were required to pay for all of it, and then the state started paying more and more and more. And so I don't know that it's all bad saying it needs to be a 50-50 partnership.
Mr. Co-Chair, do we require this of the University of Wyoming? I don't think we make the university cough up 50%.
This statute does not exist for the University of Wyoming.
Yeah, it depends on the university. For example, the dorms, I think we paid 15 million and they had to bond for 380 million after that. So it's
That was a unique situation, though. They're not helping pay for they're not coming up with 50% of the stadium. They were supposed to come up with a big chunk of the law school, which didn't happen. We're paying for, I think, all of that, maybe short of 3 or 4 million. I feel bad for the community colleges. They always end up being the redheaded stepchild, it seems. I just don't want to bake this into statute, 50% out of the CCs.
Mr. Chairman.
That's just where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the law school, the West Ends, all of that is 50% state, 50% university funds, whether it be privately raised or internally utilized funds, just like these community colleges. As this states, doesn't say it has to be privately raised. It's 50% from the state, 50% from other sources that are non-state, and that's how that's worked.
at any rate, we can cross this bridge when the bill comes out. And obviously, this bill passed the House last year, and it was not introduced, I believe, on the floor and on the Senate side. So in order for this thing to have any legs, we're going to have to work with the folks down the hall and make sure that it's the provisions are desirable, and we'll cross that bridge. And I don't think we're going to vote on this today. We're just going to present it, and it's a big bill. I mean, I went through it 2 times now, and every time I do it, I find more corrections, and then I change my mind after I or whatever. But
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, a question on another topic, if I may, within the bill on page 12, the development of a 20-year strategic plan. Does it need to state how often that needs to be updated? Because if you do a 20-year plan today and put it on the shelf and then pull it out in another 20 years, to me, it would defeat the purpose. Is there something that needs to say every 5 years we'll update that? And maybe I've missed it throughout the changes.
Mr. Chairman, I think as we work this with the Department of Construction, we kind of come up with that, but I don't think I think we just made some assumptions that we would do that, but I would defer to the director to give us some guidance there.
Mr. Chairman, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to that. If it doesn't show up in here, certainly on the SBC side, so the state building side, that I would request that the SBC put that into the rules and regulations. Now, that wouldn't affect, the school side on that, but yes, I would see that as a friendly amendment. Mr. Chairman, yeah, every 5 years.
Okay. Tamara, I'm sorry, we kind of interrupted your description.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I have a question also on page 3 and 4. We've got the Board of Trustees of University of Wyoming on that first line, and then on D, we've got Board of Trustees. why do we have Board of Trustees instead of just the University of Wyoming shall do these things? What was the thinking there? We don't ask anybody else for the board to do it. And I don't know if we'll get it from the board if we ask them to do it.
So, and Tamara can correct me, but I think we put board of the trustees at the university. That's consistent with what we have there in the community college commission. When we come to the commission, and then there's a commission of on the school side as well, on the reporting side. So it's not inconsistent.
On the schools, you're asking the districts to do it.
But on this whole reporting side that comes back to you, that's a recommendation from the K-12 commission, right?
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, as the districts expend that money, that goes into our AIM database. So when they do the requisition, then as they spend the money, whether it's higher or lower than what actually came in, that's rectified. And that is reported then annually on that 680. Once that comes in, that's required to be reported to us in the July, August timeframe. And then we actually take that to the commission, and that's approved by the commission. And then that is then shipped off to the legislature and the select committee, showing what that funding mechanism, how much was spent in major maintenance. So that is occurring under a process already with the districts. Yes, the districts are doing it. They have to compile it, but it ultimately comes back through, and they go through an audit process to make sure that's right within the district. And then we also review that. And right now we have 2 districts that we're working with. They have new personnel, and they didn't get that done timely, meet those deadlines. So 46 districts have given us that. We're working with the other 2, and then we'll update that to the commission.
Okay, go ahead. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, I think that concluded my presentation of the bill, but I can answer any questions you'd like.
Further questions? Representative Larson.
Just on the timing of the bill, is there a reason you want to push this back, Mr. Chairman, or?
The answer is yes. I mean, I'd probably have 7 or 8 different amendments, just in reading the bill. And we'd take up half the day going through that. So. And I'm guessing that not everyone has digested this bill yet, so.
So, and all that's fair, because that's kind of what we said last meeting. And
I didn't read it last meeting.
And we were gonna do it. So when do you anticipate we would work the bill?
I don't know if we'll have time on the October meeting. That's fairly busy. So my guess is we'll work it in the week of December, when we're doing a supplemental budget. I mean,
Yes, sir.
I mean, I'm
Yes, sir.
I'll ask the committee if you want to vote on this bill and make it a committee bill or not. I mean, and the other issue is we've got 2 senators here. And so and to be a committee bill, you need 3, at least a majority out of the.
Mr. Chairman, it's your committee. I'm just trying to get a feel.
Yeah.
Which of the 3 of us are you not counting?
Oh, yeah, this one. He doesn't count. So.
Well, for what it's worth, I can't support the bill in the current configuration. I'd rather work it and see the amendments.
Fair enough, but that's part of the process. We work the bill and deal with the amendments now. So I'm just.
Well, then I'm asking.
So December, we're thinking December. So what I would suggest then, if there are some amendments, because we haven't worked the bill at all, if there's some amendments that you'd like to bring forth, let's consider them and work and visit with that. And maybe we adjust this draft and have a different draft before December.
Yeah, I would concur with that. Yeah. Well, we could probably do it in October. Don, we've got time on the 20s, what is it, 26, 27?
Mr. Chairman, you are correct. The October 31st, November 1st committee is tight. However, we have included about 2 hours in our tentative agenda for this topic.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, you asked about additional personnel. And so I do want to point out that as we work through the strategic plan and all the reporting requirements, the new FCA for the state, which takes a lot of bandwidth. We have a single individual in the department that takes care of all that. That's Jeremy Ravel. He's our CFO. And so he's our database expert. And he's a one-man show and extremely well at what he does. He's been the only person in the country that's received a couple of national awards on this. And recently they want him to come out to a national facilities this next summer and present again. And I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a third award, but I don't have any backup for him. And I wasn't planning anything this year. I would work through the budget cycle, but I am probably going to request a backup for Jeremy to help with the database requirements. It doesn't really correspond with this bill other than the section that says we shall have a strategic plan. But that, again, I put a note in my discussion with the governor coming up on October 14th when he reviews our budget, that one of the challenges we face is a backup for that individual, but not asking for anything now. So.
Okay, so before we take our 10 o'clock break, I see that Mayor Pexton has arrived. And there was discussion of yesterday on where the heck's the mayor and the county commissioners when we're working on and trying to, for upgrades or new buildings, facilities at the state fair. So Mayor, can you come on up and introduce yourself? And
my other job, I own a gym. I just wanted to say on behalf of the city of Douglas, Newey Region 2 and WHAM.
just hit the button. There you go.
That one?
That one.
How about that? I just wanted to say good morning, first of all. Welcome to Douglas. On behalf of the city of Douglas, Newey Region 2 and WHAM, Wyoming Association of Municipalities, we would really like to thank you all for attending the reception last night and welcome to Douglas. Thank you. We hope to continue to do this, so, yes.
And
Thanks.
in terms of the state fair and in the new silver arena that's being proposed, and just tell us about your commitment and thoughts on that.
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question. So we really feel like the Wyoming State Fair has kind of come leaps and bounds with many, many people contributing, helping, obviously for the state of Wyoming as well. We would like to see this arena come to fruition just because it's going to help us in many ways. We believe it will also bring in more people, not only to the state fair, but also the rest of the time that the fairgrounds can be used. So I don't know if you're aware, but almost every weekend, our fairgrounds are booked with some event that's going on. So this can only help. And if we do build this arena, it will free up the other arena that we would like to possibly make into a convention center that has been in the talks. We don't really have that in Douglas right now. And economic development is huge for us. We're a very booming county right now. You probably all know that. So as a city, we're very much in favor of this and we'll do what we can to support that project.
Go.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. As a former mayor, it's always good to see another mayor. Does the commitment extend to supporting 1 cent tax that would cover half the cost? What we heard is that there's a lot of statewide events that happen at the fairgrounds, but there's also a lot of local events that happen at the fairgrounds. And to the extent that there's an economic benefit spillover to the entire community, I would think that a penny would be something that the county administration and the city could support. And that would demonstrate to the legislature a tangible commitment on your part. And we heard yesterday that 60% of the attendees at every event are within a 50-mile radius. So there's a lot of local benefit.
True.
And so does that commitment extend to helping out with a checkbook?
Well, without speaking for others, I would certainly think that we would be very amicable to looking at that. And I mean, I would think on city side, we're definitely, we would be on board with that. And I would guess that our commissioners would be as well. This is a project that we've been having discussions about for some time on a local level. So yes, I would think we would definitely be willing to look into that and see what needs to be done. That 1 cent penny does a lot. It does. You all know that. We really rely on our 5 cents. So yes, that 1 cent penny would do a lot. So yes, I think that's an accurate statement.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
And so, and just to fill that out a little bit, and some of the thinking that we've had when this was presented to us. Mr. Richards, I think in our discussions yesterday, what it was 19 million is the fill in the blanks.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, in fiscal year 24, Converse County 1 cent raised 19.4 million.
And so the current project has a price tag of roughly 27 to 30 million, let's say. And if, and through the planning process that will take a year to go through the level 3 and all that thing, and let's assume that there's a 5% inflation rate between now and construction.
For sure.
So we're probably talking about a $30 to $35 million project. And there's also additional things that may be needed for the fair. So if you have, if you can raise in with a 1 cent increase, you can raise roughly in 2 years, what would that tally? 12 and a half?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it could be structured in a variety of different ways. If it was 100% funded locally, it would be 38 million over 2 years. I think your discussions were a fraction of that spread out over X number of years.
And so if we did it 50-50, for example, so we came up with 20 million, the community came up with 20 million. I think that's kind of the buy-in that we're anticipating or just thinking about as we're mulling this over. So we just want to let you know what we're thinking as we evaluate this, but it's a great facility. I mean, an incredible amount of buildings and you know, one of our functions is just to help every community in the state in one fashion or another, but just to kind of fill in, let you know what we're thinking. And
Mr. Chair, if I may.
please. Yeah.
So as you know, putting a 1 cent on a ballot is very risky. And so when it comes to putting a 1 cent on a ballot in this community, we definitely would have to have our ducks in a row, so to say, as to why this would benefit Douglas to put that 1 cent on. In the past, we've had some difficulties with building a joint justice center when we've added that 1 cent, even though we already had that money. So where I think that we are wholeheartedly in on this project, we would definitely need to make sure that we educated our community on why this was important.
Well, and theoretically, then a portion of that penny is going to have to go to Glen Rock and to other
Absolutely.
things, and that's just part of the world we live in. So we understand that concept. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Mayor, if we put a placeholder like we do on a number of others, things like we did on the State Fair Endowment, a matching component. If we had a matching component set aside there so that the citizens of the county knew that if they pass a 1 cent tax, that we had stepped up to the plate, but it wouldn't be released until the county matched that. Does that help incentivize? Is that the type of help you need from us?
Yes.
Very good.
I'll make it short. Yes.
Senator Group.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Mayor.
Good morning.
I guess, one of the things I talked to Courtney and mentioned to Courtney about, and then suggested to you too, a facility like this, such a great community asset. And I know we have them in our community too. And a lot of times our fair board will ask the city to go out and put dust guard down on the facility. And of course they do it, or, you know, blade off or help with a drainage project, or there's 100 little things that happen. What's really helpful for us is if you were to go through all the little things that the city and the county does for the fairgrounds, monetize that to show what that level of participation already is. Because I'm sure if you really, and just talking with AJ and Courtney at the fair yesterday, they rambled off 3 or 4 things, and by the time they finished talking, they had like 6 more
Sure.
that they had thought of. That, oh yeah, there was the time then they did this, and we just swapped bills. You know, we did this for them, they did this for us. There's a lot of that happens in communities, and when you monetize it, everybody looks like, wow, we're already putting a lot into this. And so when you're out educating the public about Ascent or about these things, hey, look, you're already halfway there, or, you know, we're already making these commitments, so folks, you can, you know, give a little more on this one. So I think it just helps. It helps with the narrative with us, helps with the narratives within the community. So
If I
just a
might.
suggestion.
Ms. Conkle has done a great job. Since coming on board, it's been a complete turnaround with our fairgrounds and our state fair. And I also believe that the collaboration between city, county, and the state fairgrounds has really improved. You know, sometimes the commissioners and the city council can possibly butt heads a little bit. You may not know that, but we've really been trying to work on that relationship. So I think the more that we can work on that, the further we'll get along.
We never butt heads.
I tried to say that politely.
Okay, well, thank you very much. for
Thank
being
you.
here.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Don?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you wanted to address this before or after break or not at all, but we do have at least one member online that wanted to provide public comment on the capital construction.
Yeah, we can take some quick public comment, particularly online, so they don't have to wait forever. Thank you. Go ahead. So we'll go into public comment. Who's online?
Devin Brubaker. And while he's speaking, Mr. Belitsky, if you are interested in participating. Thank you.
Welcome. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Devin Brubaker, Airport Director for the Southwest Wyoming Regional Airport in Rock Springs. I also serve as the president of the Wyoming Airports Coalition, and I speak to you on behalf of the latter. Here today specifically to speak about the Title 16 provisions that are included in this bill, starting on page 18. Really want to thank Representative Larson for his leadership on this bill. This bill has been around for a little bit, and we've been appreciative of his willingness to work with us to address some of the concerns we had with the Title 16 statute as it's written today. So the proposed changes to 16.6.102 improve existing statute by providing exceptions to the rule for public works procurements that do not require a formal bid in the case of emergency situations and for instances where the services are not not available within the state of Wyoming. Those 2 provisions allow local governments to better comply with the statute. We do have some concerns about the use of the word known on page 19, line 16, as that's quite subjective, and we're working on some proposed amendment language around that we'll bring forward to the committee. Wyoming's airports want to hire local and support our local contractors. However, we also want to be good stewards of the public dollars that are bestowed upon us. So in that effort, we are also working on amendment language to propose to you all alongside WAM, County Commissioners Association, and the Associated General Contractors groups to look at how do we make sure that on these smaller procurements that we can still factor in the economics of the proposals from in-state contractors. So we support this bill. We want to see this bill move forward. And we're just looking to see if there's ways to continue to improve it. And once again, appreciate Representative Larson's leadership on this and appreciate the committee's time today. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. And we've got that. Come on up, Ken. We've got that circled. So when we work this bill in October, we'll, and I had the same question on similar issues. So.
And Mr. Chairman, we'll bring in well in advance of your October meeting, we'll provide any proposed amendments we have.
Thank you. We've got Representative Pendergrass. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is good to be here, and thank you, Representative Larson, for pushing this. As a background, very briefly, I've got about 40 years in logistics and maintenance. That's been my life. And I've learned a lot over those years. And I've learned enough to see some small component that is missing here, but it's an essential component. And I wanted to point that out. It was, I believe, President Reagan that said, trust but verify. And as a motor sergeant, I learned pretty quickly that you can have all of the maintenance programs in the world with all the forms to fill out and all the things that everybody's supposed to do. But unless there is a compliance element to that, an inspection element to that, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. It's just going to be a burden and a huge expense. Representative Walters touched on this with a pretty good question, but basically, unless the maintenance is actually physically accomplished, this is a total waste of time. So I would suggest, for example, among the other amendments, that on page 4, insert a Romanet 4, and it would have to be something along the lines of implement a compliance enforcement system. It doesn't need to be a big thing. It doesn't need to be mandated by the legislature. We're not ones to do that. But these agencies need to understand that unless somebody physically goes out and checks, did that air filter get changed? Did that pump get greased? It's not going to happen. People just sign it off and forget it. And if I may indulge just for a moment, when Desert Storm first started, I was a motor sergeant. I went over there with a fleet of trucks and vehicles. When Desert Storm ended, every single vehicle that I took over there rolled out of there completely capable. Part of that was due to the operators. The operators, when they first got over there, would diligently turn in their forms saying, yes, I've done my PMCS, my preventive maintenance checks and services. I've checked my oil, etc. Well, I started as they were leaving the motor pool, just going out there on occasion, and would step out and stop the vehicle and pop the hood and find a dipstick completely covered with dust. It's an example. All I had to do was stop about 3 drivers, and they got the message. With that, I would stand for any question.
Go ahead.
So Representative, your point's well taken, and I think that's what we were trying to do in Roman 3, where we say maintain records of the routine maintenance. So if that would verify that routine maintenance was being done. Now, if you don't think so, is that missing the mark?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, yes, I think it's still missing a compliance enforcement. Yeah, we have the document. You go out there in the morning and you supposedly walk around your truck and do the inspections and then sign the paperwork. That's what Romanet 3 is. You have a system of paperwork. What's missing is the reinforcement of compliance enforcement and somebody actually physically going out and inspecting that randomly. You don't have to check every single one. But as long as they know that I could be checked, you know, I did the same thing in a nursing home. I was responsible for all kinds of divisions in there. Walk up and down the halls, check on things. Yeah, somebody signed off on this sheet here that they did something. Go look at the something. Nobody's looked at it in weeks.
But Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I'm just trying to get my head around how we would word that, because we're not disagreeing at all on the intent there. But if you have a compliance component in there, thou shalt go out and physically inspect, they're going to have to come back and do the same thing. They're going to have to check the box that said I went out and physically done it. And there's nothing there that, I mean, they can do that from their office without ever going out and doing it. And so unless you have, you know, so that's something that we may want to visit about between now and October, because I'm not sure that just having that language there is any more incentive for them to actually do it than what we currently have in 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, exactly. And Representative Larson, I would be glad to work with you on language and try to get perhaps better expressed. This just occurred to me as I was listening today. Essentially, you have to be able to hold somebody's feet to the fire. In the military, for example, an officer would come in as a motor officer, and he would essentially sign for the equipment that he was responsible for. And that kind of goes back to your directive earlier, which wasn't real popular, but without it, you're wasting your time and money, in my view.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman,
We appreciate the comments. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, you're saying on page 4, you would make a item number 4, I believe. But on page 4, that just refers to University of Wyoming. Wouldn't you want to make that for all entities? They all have to do that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Absolutely. I was just using one example, and you'd have to comb through the bill and figure out whether that was there or have a central one that they all refer to. I don't know the structure.
Okay, appreciate the comments. Was there one more online, Don? Okay, it's 10:30. We're a little bit behind schedule, but that's okay. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Okay, moving on the agenda, we've got two bills now involving foreign ownership of property. So Tamara, why don't you take us through the first bill?
All right. Mr. Chairman, do you want a background on the working group
Sure.
or a recap of that and where the bills came from? All right, Tamara Revley here. With LSO, I helped staff the Foreign Property Ownership Working Group, and it was comprised of Senator Kinski, Representative Nicholas, Senator Salazar, Representative Larson, and Representative Stith. The working group met 3 times remotely on July 23rd, August 9th, and August 21st. And attendees at those meetings included Senator Nethercott, Director Budd, Deputy Director Niken, other staff from the Office of Homeland Security, DCI, a member of the Federal Department of Homeland Security, the Governor's Office, and the County Clerks Association. The group came back with these 2 bill drafts for you. The first sort of tweaks what you did last year as a legislature in Senate File 77. And the second one is longer and more substantive to create a review process for transactions or conveyances where a foreign party would seek to purchase land in Wyoming. So that said, I'll jump into 25 LSO 161. You should have working draft 0.6 in front of you. It's titled Property Conveyances Near Critical Infrastructure. And the primary purpose of this bill is to revise the process for reporting conveyances in critical infrastructure zones in Wyoming. The legislature passed Senate File 77 last session that requires the governor and the Office of Homeland Security to designate critical infrastructure zones and then to provide those zones to county clerks. The county clerks then review the zones, and as conveyances happen in their counties, they report back to the office any conveyances that are in those critical infrastructure zones, and that's current law. This bill draft, based on feedback from the county clerks and working together with the Office of Homeland Security, suggested changes to remove the requirement for county clerks to identify those conveyances within the zones and instead just report all conveyances to the Office of Homeland Security, where the office would then take all of the conveyance data and figure out if any of them are occurring within a critical infrastructure zone and should be investigated further. Then as the working group was amending these parts of the statutes, it saw a need to amend other terms, including the definition of conveyance and to add a definition for real property and to update a federal reference to federal adversaries. So if you want to jump in on page 1 of your bill is the title, relates to Homeland Security and amends duties of the county clerks, the Division of Criminal Investigation, the Office of Homeland Security for identification of conveyances near critical infrastructure, and then repeals requirements and creates and amends definitions. On page 2, 91618 is the DCI statute. Subsection B directs the division to investigate conveyances. And here, the working group decided to remove the term leases and leasehold interests and instead to expand the definition of conveyance to make sure it consistently covered all types of property interests. So that change on page 2, lines 10 and 11 is to update the term conveyance, as defined within this bill draft, and then to direct the division to investigate any conveyance reported by county clerks that may result in a threat to national security or state security, or whether the conveyance involves a designated country or person. And those designated country or persons are foreign adversaries, as you'll see in the definition. The changes on page 3 update that change to the word conveyance and leasehold interests. And on page 3 are the county clerk statute on the bottom of page 3. Line 15, 18.3.402. This was the directive passed last year in Senate File 77 to tell county clerks to report all conveyances within 5 miles of a designated critical infrastructure zone. So now it just says to report all conveyances to the director of the Office of Homeland Security and the Division of Criminal Investigation. And so this will reduce the need for the Office of Homeland Security and the governor to send a map out to every county of where the critical infrastructure zones are. They'll never have to know where the critical infrastructure zones are. Instead, it will all reside with the Office of Homeland Security, where they can figure out when a conveyance happens, if it's occurring within or near one of those zones. On page 4 are the Office of Homeland Security statutes. 1913-104 directs the director now to consult with the governor and assist the Attorney General in Division of Criminal Investigation on the designation of critical infrastructure zones. And then now to investigate and identify conveyances that are within 5 miles of critical infrastructure zones, which are disclosed by the recordings reported by the county clerks. Again, they'd get every single recording that happens in a county and would match those to the areas that are designated as critical infrastructure zone. On page 5, as the working group was working through this bill and discussing whether the term conveyance was broad enough and how leases and different interests in real property, whether they were included, it made sense to bring in the definition of conveyance and to try to clarify it. Under existing law, as was passed last year in Senate File 77, conveyance means as defined in Wyoming Statute 34-1-102 and includes conveyances of real properties, surface interests, mineral interests, and pore space interests. And so I've copied in the staff comment on lines 12 through 29. That statute that was being pointed to, the term conveyance, and rather than point to it now, the language on lines 5 through 10 brings in that definition, except expands it. So it clarifies that it means every instrument in writing by which any interest in real property is created, alienated, mortgaged, leased, or assigned, or by which title to any real property may be affected in law or equity. The only thing it would exclude is wills. And this is broader than the law and existing law, which also would have excluded leases for a term under 3 years and deed for sale. So it's a broader definition of conveyance. Then on page 6, there's an update that would be required if we're already working within this section. This is that the federal regulations that designate foreign adversaries have been moved. They were redesignated without change from 15 CFR Part 7.4 to Part 791.4A. And I've copied in that list of foreign adversaries. It's the People's Republic of China, the Republic of Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and the Maduro regime. And so that does not change any of those entities that are being, that have been named adversaries. It just updates the regulation that is being pointed to in federal law. On the bottom of page 6 is the creation of the definition of real property. And this goes back to the definition of conveyance, because conveyance is an instrument in writing in which title to real property is affected. And then real property is clarified to mean all interests in land and appurtenances, structures, any intangible characteristic that contributes to the fair market value thereof, and that it includes surface interests, mineral interests, and pore space interests. This is sort of based on the definition in taxation statutes, and I think it clarifies some questions that were raised by the working group about, well, does this include all parts of real property? What about a building sitting on real property or a infrastructure on real property and the land itself? And so try to broaden that and make it as encompassing as it is for the tax statutes. I believe the remainder of the changes are conforming. On page 7, this directs the county clerks within 15 days that a conveyance is recorded with the county clerks, that they shall report those to the director in the Division of Criminal Investigation. And then the bottom of section D, page 7, the Division of Criminal Investigation and the director shall determine whether a conveyance is within a critical infrastructure zone or located not more than 5 miles from a critical infrastructure zone. and upon reasonable suspicion, investigate the conveyance to determine if it involves a designated country or person, and that's a foreign adversary, or if it poses a threat to national or state security or critical infrastructure. The repealer is to repeal the requirements that the director send that list to county clerks. And then it would be effective July 1st, 2025.
Okay, questions for Tamara on the draft bill? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 5, under the conveyances, the leasing of real property, I don't know that you record with the county clerk your leases. If I have a house and I lease it to you, I don't tell the county clerk. The county clerk would just be aware that I'm the owner, not who I have it leased to. So a little more explanation on that leased piece.
That's right, Representative Walters, Mr. Chairman. We did learn that leases are rarely recorded. They technically can be recorded. And some leases are recorded, but it is indeed rare.
And follow up, Mr. Chairman, they're not required to be recorded. They just can be. Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the discussion we had. Why do you include leases when they're not recorded? And but the only thing that is reviewed is what is recorded. So unless we want to make all leases be recorded, it didn't make sense to include them. Yeah, if they're recorded. Yeah. Okay, for the other questions on the bill? Okay, any public comment on the bill? As drafted. Do we have someone online, I take it?
Mr. Chairman, we have a John Belitsky, who is joining us and will provide online public comment.
Okay. Come on board.
Hello. My name is John Belitsky. I'm trying to get my camera to work here. I apologize. Hello, my name is John Belitsky. I represent Balcony Technology Group. Balcony Technology Group provides governments with means to bring their records onto the blockchain and provides the data and technology infrastructure for the type of work involved with recording titles, deed, real property, and the transfers. I come before you today to the committee, firstly to express my appreciation that you're taking up this matter. I think this is an incredibly important bill. I've read through the bill in its entirety, and pleased with the work that was done here, as I think this is incredibly prescient given the situation that we're in the United States at the moment. The work that I have been doing has been around how you can actually execute this type of control over foreign entities purchasing land while preserving the privacy of the parties to the transaction, which I think is critical in the state of Wyoming, given that Wyoming allows for the anonymous transfer of property by beneficial owners. And I believe that the solution here is a zero knowledge proof. And I'd like for just a moment to explain how you might employ a zero knowledge proof in this process to produce the effect that you're endeavoring to achieve. A zero knowledge proof is simply a way to prove something without revealing the data that it proves. A typical example of this is if you go to a bar and they need to know that you're 21 years of age or older. Today, you have to show them a driver's license that gives them your full name. It gives them your address. It gives them your height, your weight, all sorts of details that are not germane to whether or not you're 21 years of age or older. They don't need to know your date of birth, for example. And so in the matter of determining if a foreign purchaser is in fact foreign, this ought to be a binary, in my view, which I think is consistent with the state laws in Wyoming, that would allow someone to preserve their privacy, preserve their anonymity, while still meeting the criteria to purchase land that is described in this bill. I think this is important for two very meaningful reasons. The first one is this bill allows for a 180-day review period to determine if somebody can purchase this land if the matter is referred to the relative agencies. There's another 90 days beyond that. That period is extensive and it may be necessary, but to the extent practical, the use of technology like what I'm describing could greatly reduce the time it takes to process this type of information and adjudicate whether or not an individual or an entity can rightfully purchase the property. In the absence of an expeditious review of this type of information, there is in effect an option or an encumbrance on real property that fits into the zones that you're describing. And I've seen this happen in New York City, where I'm from, where regulations have caused for diminution of value of real estate because of these processes or these regulations. I think this regulation is required, and I think that the forethought of using technology to shorten those periods to ensure that that type of adverse effect isn't imposed on landowners is critical. And I also think that it's absolutely necessary, to the extent practical in a state like Wyoming, that you enforce this idea of privacy and do so using zero knowledge proof technologies. And I'd like to conclude before I answer any questions, if you have any, by making very clear that I do not own zero knowledge proof technology. Zero knowledge proof technology has existed since the 80s. Anybody can use it. I do use it in the systems that I design and build for Balcony Technology Group, but this is not a piece of intellectual property that I own, but rather a method that I hope you will consider using in Wyoming.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. What would it cost to implement a program like this in the state of Wyoming, to where all land transactions were handled via the blockchain as you're describing, and be able to do this zero knowledge proofing, to where no extra information would be shared, just the relevant information?
Thank you for the question. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. It should not cost demonstrably more than any existing software. This is just software. The compute that's used to actually produce a zero knowledge proof is not something that would be expensive to actually execute. Building it, an estimate for building it would require understanding the existing state systems, who the stakeholders are, how they interact with that data, what the security measures are for that data. So to give a broad estimate, I think would be really inappropriate, but I'd be happy to look into it for you. I would love to look into it for Wyoming.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. And we are happy with this piece of legislation. It's a cleanup that was on to Senate File 77. And there is $250,000 in 77 to get the clerks tooled up to be able to transfer documents or transfer the information that they need to on conveyances. And we appreciate the opportunity to be able to comment with the working group. And I'm happy to stand for any questions, but we can't administer this bill as it is. Yep. Thank you.
That was planned. So So it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the bill? Question being called on the bill. Roll call.
Good morning, members of the committee. The motion is on LSO 25 LSO 161 working draft 0.6. This is subject to Rule 14 of the committee, which requires a majority vote of both the House and Senate members. Senator Anderson. Senator Guru. Aye. Senator Nethercott.
Excused.
Senator Salazar.
Excused.
Excused.
Representative Henderson.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Sherwood.
Aye.
Representative Stith.
Excused.
Representative Walters.
Aye.
Representative Zwanitzer Dave.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Kinski.
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion is approved. We can wait, or you could assign a House or a Senate.
House. That might be redirected in January, I'll see. At the pleasure of the new chairs. All right, let's go to the next bill.
Mr.
Tamara,
Chairman,
please go ahead.
this bill is a bit more complex. It's 25 LSO 163, working draft 0.6. It's called Protecting Critical Infrastructure from Foreign Adversaries. And I think the working group with this bill was trying to find a way to safeguard Wyoming's critical infrastructure and to prevent foreign adversaries from acquiring land that could pose a risk while not discouraging foreign investment in the state. And so the working group came up with a kind of redraft of bills that had been proposed in the past sessions, including most recently by Senator Steinmetz, Senate File 102, and using as much as that bill as they could, but tweaking it a bit to establish, instead of a complete prohibition, a review process to evaluate land conveyances that are near critical infrastructure zones. And so this bill outlines the process for foreign parties that are seeking to purchase property. It would empower the Office of Homeland Security to review and investigate, and if necessary, block transactions that could compromise state security. It also provides for divestiture if property is acquired in violation of the law, and addresses several issues of concern that the committee talked about in depth at their June meeting. The bill would recognize the existing role of the Federal Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States, or CFIUS, by recognizing safe harbors provided by that committee. It would envision cooperation with federal agencies, and it would include an exception for resident aliens, allowing them the same rights of property as U.S. citizens in line with the Wyoming Constitution. The approach last year with Senate File 102 that did not pass was to have a companion constitutional amendment. And what this bill what the working group decided to do to address that constitutional provision was to create an exception. And finally, the bill would have a fiscal impact. It would allocate funding for 2 additional full-time positions with the Office of Homeland Security. I'd like to work the bill now. Page 1 is your title. Bill broadly relates to property and prohibits conveyances near critical infrastructure to prohibited foreign adversaries as specified, requires a review and approval of specified conveyances, authorizes the Office of Homeland Security to review and investigate conveyances, authorizes divestiture, requires notice in assessment schedules and tax statements, provides that exception for resident aliens, amends definition, requires rules, and authorizes positions and grants funding. Page 2 is a create section, and much of this bill is a create. So here within the Office of Homeland Security statutes, kind of piggybacking on what was enacted in Senate File 77 last year, you come in and create new sections 503 through 506. Section 503 on page 2 is the general purpose of these new statutes, and that's that the Office of Homeland Security would investigate conveyances and review conveyances that require approval to prohibit foreign parties from gaining access or proximity to critical infrastructure, and authorizing rulemaking authority to implement the act. On page 2, the new section 1913-504 would outline the application process. After July 1st, 2025, a prohibited foreign party seeking a conveyance in the state of Wyoming would apply to the Office of Homeland Security. And again, where critical infrastructure zones are would not be widely known. A foreign party might know whether they are a foreign adversary by the definition, but they may not know if they're trying to convey land within a critical infrastructure zone. And so that necessitates the need for prohibited foreign parties to seek approval for proposed transactions. On page 3 continues the application process. They would be required to include specific information, the name, legal address, description, location, the current and intended use, and then any documents provided in a review by CFIUS if they're also having that review done federally. And finally, on page 4, any other documentation or information requested by the Office of Homeland Security. On page 4, subsection C is a provision for the initial determination. And this would grant 90 days for the Office of Homeland Security to make a determination of whether an applicant is a prohibited foreign party and if the real property that they're seeking approval for is actually within or partially within a critical infrastructure zone. So they make that initial determination of whether this transaction even needs to be approved. Subsection D outlines the review and investigation period for those transactions that they determine are indeed involving a foreign adversary in a critical infrastructure zone. And this review and investigation period would not exceed 180 days, although with good cause, the Office of Homeland Security could take an additional 90 days. They could also expedite the review if desired. Subsection E on page 5 provides that the Office of Homeland Security should pause if a transaction is being reviewed by the federal CFIUS, that they shall not approve or deny a conveyance until after final action is complete. But this wouldn't prohibit continuation of review and investigation or sharing of information with the federal government. On page 5 is really the charge to the Office of Homeland Security and how they carry this out, and leading on to page 6. And first, it clarifies that this information, their investigation and review, would not constitute a public record, would not be open to public inspection, but could be released to other state and federal government entities when necessary to protect the public interests. And in determining whether to approve or deny an application, the Office of Homeland Security is asked to review the proposed ownership or controlling interests, the potential impact of the conveyance to state security or critical infrastructure, the proximity of the real property to critical infrastructure, and any other factor reasonably related to the protection of state security or critical infrastructure. The director on page 7, subsection C, would be under a duty to issue an applicant an approval letter for conveyance if any of the following conditions are met. One is what the Office of Homeland Security determines the conveyance does not pose a threat to state security or critical infrastructure. And that's where this bill isn't a complete prohibition. The Office of Homeland Security could find that a conveyance did not pose any threat and would be approved. 2 is that the Office of Homeland Security failed without good cause to complete review and investigation of conveyance during the review and investigation period. And 3 is if a safe harbor is issued with respect to the same transaction by the federal government, by CFIUS. On page 8 are requirements for Wyoming safe harbor. So if an approval letter is granted to an applicant, then the Office of Homeland Security would not conduct any further review or investigation of this particular transaction unless false or misleading information was provided or material was omitted. And subsection E is the right of an appeal of a denial of a conveyance in accordance with the Wyoming Administrative Procedure Act. Now, the new subsection on the bottom of page 8, the new section 1913-506, is the exception for resident aliens. And the staff comment there in Article 1, Section 29, just copies the text in of that Wyoming statute that says no distinction shall ever be made by law between resident aliens and citizens as to the possession, taxation, enjoyment, and descent of property. So the bill makes an exception for a prohibited foreign party who is a resident alien, that they shall have the right to be conveyed real property in the state of Wyoming under the same terms as a citizen of the United States during the continuance of the alien's residence in the state of Wyoming. If that party no longer is a resident alien or has residence in the state of Wyoming, then that party would need to have their transaction or conveyance approved as if it were occurring under the prior sections of application and review process by Office of Homeland Security. Article 2 goes into the land and property statutes and creates a new section 3415-201 to enforce the provisions. First, on the bottom of page 9, we take the definitions from the Office of Homeland Security and say they apply to this article. And then on page 10, create a new section 3415-202. Subsection A says no conveyances of the property located on, within, or partially within a critical infrastructure zone shall be made to a prohibited foreign party unless it's been approved. Subsection B says if it is made, it shall be subject to divestiture. And divestiture would occur within an amount of time determined reasonable in rule of the Office of Homeland Security for different classes of property. Then the proceeds of the conveyance would be used to satisfy debts and would be returned to the prohibited foreign party. Subsection C says that the prohibited foreign party does not divest as they should, as required by this statute. Then the Attorney General shall commence an action for divestiture. Then subsection D clarifies that the proceeds of any sale at auction of real property ordered by a court for divestiture, except for liens, would be remitted to the prohibited foreign party. Subsection E clarifies that the Attorney General would be required to record the notice of the dependency of an action and any court order for the sale of real property. So those would be recorded with the county clerks. Section 3415-203 on page 12 specifies that this act shall not invalidate or subject to divestiture for a party if it's done by a former owner or another person holding or owning a former interest of the property. It should not invalidate the innocent party's title. Section 2 on the bottom of page 12 creates your amend provisions. So we go into existing statute just to conform and amend and make these new statutes fit with Wyoming statutes. In 1913-105, the Director of the Office of Homeland Security, they would be directed to enforce the prohibition for the conveyance of real property to a prohibited foreign party without approval. Within the definitions section, just to keep things consistent between these two bills and not cause any issues, the definition of conveyance would also be updated, just as we spoke about in the prior bill. The terminology of designated country or person would be updated to foreign adversaries to avoid confusion. And then the committee requested an amendment to clarify that foreign adversaries mean a foreign government or foreign non-government person now or in the future determined to be a foreign adversary by the United States Secretary. And the same thing, now or in the future, designated as a state sponsor of terrorism by the United States Secretary of State under the Arms Export Control Act. Now, beginning on page 15, these paragraphs create definition that are loosely or as closely as they could be taken from Senate File 102 to define who a foreign government is, to define what it means to be operating a business under a foreign government that's prohibited, and how to define those ownership, what constitutes owning or having substantial control or substantial interest in a business entity like an LLC or a corporation or a trust or an estate. So foreign government is the first definition. Means any government other than the United States or a state, territory, or district or political subdivision. Party means pretty much any business entity, any natural person, corporation, company, association, firm, etc. And prohibited foreign party means a citizen or resident of a foreign adversary who's not also a citizen of the United States. And this is on the top of page 16, and this was intended to address dual citizenship. If somebody has a dual citizenship, they would not be covered if they're a citizen of the United States as well. A foreign government formed within a foreign adversary, a party, meaning a business entity other than a natural person or government that is created or organized under the laws of the foreign adversary, or any other type of business entity that is created or organized under the laws of any state of the United States, in which a significant interest or substantial control is directly or indirectly held, or is held by one of those foreign entities, a citizen or resident of a foreign adversary, a foreign government, a business entity that's created or organized under the laws of a foreign government within a foreign adversary, or an agent, trustee, subsidiary, or other fiduciary or person that's acting on their behalf. Then real property is defined, and this definition is the same as in the bill you voted to sponsor. Just to clarify that it means the same as generally it means within the tax statutes. Residence is defined on page 18 to mean a natural person's principal dwelling place where they intend to remain. Resident alien is defined for purposes of the resident alien exception. It means a natural person who's not a citizen of the United States and is a resident of a state, territory, trusteeship, or protectorate of the United States. And significant interest or substantial control means generally A, B, and C address 25% or more ownership or interest of a business entity, whether solely as in subparagraph A, or in concert under subparagraph B, or in aggregate under subparagraph C. The working group did want a new subparagraph D to clarify even an interest of less than 25% if the party actually directs the business and affairs of the party, of the business entity. Then I think we're almost wrapping up here. On page 20 is just to clarify that when the clerks are reporting conveyances, if they run into a conveyance that they find from the clerks that a transaction likely should require application and approval, but it was not made, then the Director of the Office of Homeland Security would notify all parties to the conveyance. And a cleanup of the public records provision that's in existing statute, that just to conform it, that any investigation or information that's obtained during an investigation would shall not be a public record, but it could be shared when it's necessary to protect the public interest with other state and federal government entities like law enforcement. Page 21 is the notice that would go out on the tax schedules. And page 22 is the notice of this prohibition and application process that would go out on the written assessment statements. Section 3 is authorization for 2 full-time positions and the appropriation of $209,800 from the general fund. That is a 1-year appropriation for 2 positions. And I would ask that you make an amendment if you do run with this, just to clarify that it would be doubled and included in the next budget period on page 24. Then section 4 is the implementation date of July 1st, except for the appropriation, which would be effective immediately. So I'll stand for questions on the bill or
Tamara, back in where we talked about notifying the applicant that they had been approved, I didn't see a requirement to notify them that they hadn't been approved. Is that just assumed, or? And I hadn't caught that when we was working with workers. Page 11.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I think that was sort of assumed in the bill, but could be more explicit.
So would you put it in that location?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, it might fit on lines 4 and 5. When notification is going to be required is going to be within the review and investigation period, which would be 180 days or 90 days from when an applicant knows that their transaction needs to be reviewed.
So I think probably the easiest way is just do a conceptual amendment and stick it in.
And Mr. Chairman, it still was kind of a question. We had a lot of legal minds when we, on the working group, and I had never not caught that, but maybe it's not needed, but.
It just makes sense to do it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I think I have another similar, just cleanup clarification. So on page, under the divest section, that it talks about, if that foreign entity or the foreign owner then sells the property voluntarily. It talks about Office of State Lands holding those funds in case that there are liens that need to be paid. But it's not really clear if there is no lien, can those funds then just be remitted directly to the former owner of the property? Thank you.
And Representative Sherwood and Chairman Nicholas, I think that would make sense. The language that exists on page 12, lines 1 and 2, any remaining proceeds shall be remitted to the prohibited foreign party. You would amend in similar language on the top of page 11 around line 9.
Please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question on our language. On page 15 of this, we are saying there in paragraph B that it's determined by the United States Secretary of State. But on the previous bill that we just approved on page 6, we say it's approved by the United States Secretary of Commerce. Is one or the other correct, or are both correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Anderson, I think subparagraph A relates to named foreign adversaries by the United States Secretary of Commerce. And subparagraph B relates to state sponsors of terrorism named by the United States Secretary of State under the Arms Export Control Act. And so on the prior bill, you were only dealing with the first subparagraph A, those foreign adversaries. And this bill is dealing with both foreign adversaries and state sponsors of terrorism.
Thank you. One more question. On page 8, I really object to the Constitution here saying Article 129, no distinction should ever be made by law between resident aliens. It doesn't say legal resident aliens, so I'm assuming an illegal resident alien could fit into this category. Do we need to correct that Article 1, Section 29?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think that would be the subject of a constitutional amendment if you wanted to have one drafted.
What would you recommend? Just eliminating that section or putting legal into it?
Senator Anderson, I think I could work on that for you. Whether you might want to just update the terminology to be more consistent with immigration law as we know it today versus as it was thought about and the terminology that was used. But if you want to clarify that the rights, that discrimination would not be allowed only between legal residents, between persons who hold a green card or who are legally in the country on a visa, you might be able to update that language a bit more than just to say legal resident aliens.
If we could do it without making a constitution change, that would sure be wonderful.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you. This is just, I guess, up for discussion. I'd like to hear from the committee thoughts on the requirement that our county assessors would be sending out a statement with all of our property tax paper statements in terms of notifying about this prohibition. It seems a little odd to me that I'd be opening my mail and getting my property tax statement and assessment. I'd be getting information about property tax relief programs. And then I would be reading about, foreign ownership in critical infrastructure. And maybe I discount that, or maybe I call the county assessor, but we just adopted a bill that said the county assessors won't have those maps. They won't have those locations. And so if we're thinking about targeted messaging, I don't think this does it. And it just seems a little clunky and strange.
Comments on representatives' comments? Go ahead.
Tamara, can you remind me the conversation, or if you recall any with the committee? This is kind of going on the there around on page 10 where starting on line 12 where it talks about any time after any foreign party after July 1st, 2025 shall divest the real property. If it was discovered that the property was conveyed prior to July 1, 2025, and just had not been brought to that attention, how do we take care of that? Is that just something that's left in Director Budd's office? Is that's notified, or is there a requirement that they have to divest, or the federal agency, of course, comes into play? But walk me through that, please.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Senator Chairman Nicholas, this was a topic of conversation within the working group. And I think as a matter of policy, the question is, should this be prospective or should it be retroactive? Transactions that have already occurred, that maybe have occurred years ago, what do you want to do with them? Do you want to look back at them or find them as you go, or do you want to make this prospective? And my understanding from the working group direction was to make it prospective. So it only applies to conveyances of real property that occur on and after July 1st, 2025. So anything that's already transferred hands prior to July 1st, 2025 would not be subject to this prohibition or to review.
And the conversation of the working group was it's probably unconstitutional. And a lack of, so we can't go backwards. I mean, because it was constitutional at the time and it was lawful at the time when the transaction occurred. So unwind it would be a takings. Pretty simple, I think.
Mr. Chairman, so, and remind me, but that doesn't exclude them from coming under the scrutiny, such as the situation we had in Wyoming this last year, where if an entity is identified and meets that threshold that they need to be for sale under the federal commission, that can still take place.
I think this provides that if that situation occurs, we notify CIFAS so they can perform that review.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Tamara. Tamara, on page 23, line 19 was 209,800. You suggested that was just for 1 year and that we should double that. But when I read on in that paragraph, it says that this appropriation be included in the standard budget request for Homeland Security. Doesn't that take care of that? Do we still need to double that?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Anderson, that's a great question. It should be included in the standard budget, which is for a fiscal biennium. But in recent years, in dealing with budget cuts, the legislature and the Joint Appropriations Committee and their language has been very explicit about doubling or not doubling, about whether something is 1 year or 2 years. And so that was a recommendation that did come from our budget and fiscal staff, just to be consistent with all language.
You don't trust us? You don't think we'll get put it up?
You know, that's a pretty big pay cut of 50% if you don't double it.
Mr. Chairman, Travis McNevin here on behalf of Balcony Technology Group. We'll certainly be brief, as you may have realized or recognized already that Mr. Belinsky got a little bit ahead of himself in this testimony as it related to this bill and not the previous one with respect to the 180 days and the 90. And the technology, of course, applies the same information. I just wanted to clarify that point. He texted me afterwards and with a little oops, and so certainly apologize to the committee. The other thing that was asked to express is that Balcony, as it was referenced with CFIUS, of course, which is the Committee of Foreign Investment in the United States, interagency committee that reviews and regulates foreign investment in the U.S. USDA has a seat on that as relates to agricultural issues, and Balcony has been working with USDA through CFIUS, sharing some of the same information and ideas as well, and just wanted to let the committee to be aware of that as well. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. We will close public comment then. Any action on the bill by the committee?
Move the bill. Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Any amendments? Please.
I would just note on the notification of not being approved, a conceptual will be, or whatever that language need be inserted in the bill. And if I may, also on the divestiture requirement, where is that at on page? The right, page 11, line 9, putting that language in as well.
Second. Okay. Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion carries. Please, Representative Walton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 24, in section 3, conceptual amendment to just note that would be doubled to account for the full biennium in the next standard budget.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion carries. Any other amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Okay, so page 21 under section 3913-103 under imposition. I guess I'm just not a fan of this. I think it's strange. I would delete everything from line 7 to the bottom, line 23, and then on to page 22 from line 1 to 5.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Go ahead.
I recall that being a significant amount of conversation with a work group on how do we notify people and how do we get the information out, and if there's so that's our intent there, and if we remove that, then how do we get the how do we inform people? So I'd be against that.
Mr. Chairman, I understand the intent is for notification. I think that's very valid. I don't think this is the targeted approach to do that. And I can tell you out door knocking with my constituents in the last few weeks, when somebody says like, man, my property taxes keep going up, where's relief for that? I said, okay, did you get your statement? Yes. Did you look on the backside? No. So they're not even reading information about property tax relief. So I don't think that this is gonna get to the right people doing notification this way, so.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So if the state has state parks warns people about not jumping off the cliff, and if people don't read the sign and still jump off the cliff, that does not negate the need for us to put a sign up and say, don't jump off the cliff. And so I think if they're not reading it, I appreciate that, but I think we need to provide the opportunity and say, we've given you the information and don't jump off the cliff.
Mr. Chairman, in that beautiful example, that is a targeted approach. That sign is targeted towards that person who should not jump off the cliff, and that's very relevant. But again, if we're sending out a notice that is not targeted to the appropriate audience, I think it's a pointless exercise.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm in favor of the amendment of this removal, and it's really because a tax statement is for the current owner of the property, not a future owner. And it's not the current owner's responsibility to go out and determine if they are in a critical infrastructure zone, to determine if they're a foreign entity. The current owner's job or requirement is just simply pay their taxes. So I think the bringer of the amendment's spot on. This is not the right audience to be targeting the current owner. It's the future owner that this entire bill is targeted towards, is a future owner, not a current owner. So again, I support the amendment of removing this language.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
All the current owners were future owners at one time. And so they may not know at the time they bought the property, but then it would inform them that, whoop, you missed the boat.
Anyone else want to jump off this cliff? Okay, all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Show of hands, all those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 4-4. Are you yay or nay, Dave?
Nay.
Against it. So the amendment fails. Back to the bill. Any other amendments? Please.
It's just a technical, I believe, that there seems to be an extra word, page 4, line 11. Page 4, line 11. It reads, shall be require approval. I think it's just a technical. I don't think B is right.
Shall be require, yeah, that's a typo, I think.
Yeah.
What line?
Line 11. It reads, shall be require approval. I don't think we need the B.
So, yeah, I think that's just grammatical, so we don't need to take a vote on. Any other amendments? Questioning on the bill as amended. Roll call, please.
Members of the committee, the motion is on 25 LSO 163 working draft 0.6 as amended. Senator Anderson. Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Nethercott.
Excused.
Senator Salazar.
Excused.
Representative Henderson.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Sherwood.
Aye.
Representative Stiff.
Excused.
Representative Walters. Representatives Juan and Sir Dave.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Kinski.
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion passes. Would you like a tentative House or Senate file?
You have a preference?
Let's go ahead and start it. Senate.
Okay, Senate file. Okay, committee. So what's the pleasure of the committee? It's noon. Do we want to just keep working through the?
I have it.
At what time? Yeah. Need a noon obligation. Just go to lunch.
Mr. Chairman, lunch is right down the hall, so we don't need to take a long time with it,
So the
but
quick,
it is down.
under the current schedule, we come back at 1:30. Would prefer 1.
Yeah.
Is that all right? So we'll be back at 1 o'clock. Stand in recess till then.